Throughout history, there are moments, places where the boundary between the known and the unknown blurs, leaving behind only echoes of terror and unsolved questions. From ancient ruins to vanished civilizations, the mysteries that haunt our past defy explanation, chilling our very souls with their darkness. What happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? What were the secrets buried within the Great Pyramid's walls? And what unseen forces stalked the night in ancient forests still whispered about today? Prepare to step into a world where history's most terrifying enigmas await. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. In the heat of a summer's day in 1590, the shores of what is now the North Carolina coast stood eerily still. The wind rustled the tall grasses and the waves lapped gently against the beach, but there was no sign of life. No settlers, no ships in the distance, no smoke rising from the campsites where once, just 3 years earlier, a colony had begun to establish itself in the New World. Roanoke Island, situated on the Outer Banks, was meant to be the cornerstone of England's ambitions in the Americas. Sir Walter Raleigh had dispatched a group of settlers to this remote part of the world, hoping to lay the foundation for a prosperous colony. But when John White, the colony's governor, returned to Roanoke in 1590 after a 3-year absence to resupply and bring much-needed supplies, what he found left him and the world baffled. The settlement was completely deserted. There were no signs of struggle or violence, no corpses, no abandoned weapons, nothing to suggest a violent end. All that remained were the ruins of homes, abandoned tools, and one cryptic clue, a single word carved into a post of the fort: Croatan. This was the name of a nearby island, home to a Native American tribe with whom the settlers had had peaceful relations before White left. But the message was not a plea for help, nor a warning. It was simply the word Croatan, nothing more. And it was this seemingly simple clue that would become the focal point of one of history's greatest mysteries. Many theories have emerged over the centuries to explain the disappearance of the Roanoke settlers, but none offered definitive answers. The mainstream narrative suggests that the settlers were forced to leave due to harsh conditions, perhaps integrating with the nearby Croatan tribe or other native groups. Some historians speculate that the settlers may have been absorbed into the native population, their identities lost to time. But if they had joined the Croatans, why leave only that cryptic clue behind? And why would they abandon all their belongings, leaving no trace of their presence? These questions remain unanswered. Other theories lean into the supernatural. Some suggest that the settlers fell victim to a mysterious disease, possibly a form of smallpox, that wiped them out quickly and silently. Yet, there is no clear evidence of such an epidemic in the area at the time. Even more far-fetched theories propose the involvement of alien forces, with some citing the word Croatan as a possible coded message, or even evidence of extraterrestrial intervention. But these ideas, though intriguing, remain firmly within the realm of speculation. Then there are the theories rooted in the idea of conflict and tension with the local tribes. While the settlers and the Croatans had maintained peaceful relations, some believe that an unseen conflict may have ignited between different native groups, resulting in the settlers' tragic end. Yet no widespread violence or resistance from the indigenous peoples of the region has been documented, leaving this theory without solid grounding. In the years following White's return, numerous expeditions were sent to investigate the mystery, but none were able to find definitive proof of what had happened to the settlers. Some searched the coast for clues. Others sought out the Croat Island, but every lead ended in frustration. There were reports of settlers seen living with native groups, but no hard evidence ever emerged to confirm these sightings. As time passed, the story of the lost colony became a symbol of the unexplained, a haunting reminder of what might have happened in the wilderness, far beyond the reach of European civilization. Despite the centuries that have passed, Roanoke's mystery endures, leaving behind more questions than answers. Was it famine that drove the settlers to leave? Did they integrate with the native tribes, as some suggest? Or was there something more sinister at play? And why was Croatan the only clue left behind, like a riddle that will never be solved? As the centuries roll on, the fate of the Roanoke settlers remains one of history's most tantalizing enigmas. An unsolved mystery that lingers like a whisper in the wind. The truth is out there somewhere, waiting to be uncovered. Or perhaps, as some now wonder, the mystery was never meant to be solved at all. The year is 1692, and the small Puritan settlement of Salem, Massachusetts, is a quiet, tightly knit community tucked between dense forests and rocky shores. The air is thick with superstition, fear, and religious fervor, where every creak of wood and flicker of candlelight is magnified into something unseen, something unholy. But in the winter months of 1692, something darker began to stir within Salem. It began with whispers, tiny, unremarkable murmurs in the corners of homes, at the edges of crowded church pews, strange, unexplainable behavior. The sounds of girls convulsing, shrieking, and speaking in tongues. Was it mere illness or something far more sinister? Soon the whispers would become something much louder, an uncontrollable storm of fear and violence that would sweep through Salem like wildfire. The hysteria known as the Salem Witch Trials would unfold with the intensity of a fever dream. It would claim the lives of 20 people, ruin countless others, and forever stain the history of colonial America. But the cause of this mass panic, what truly set the spark, is still debated, and the events that led to the trials remain a chilling enigma. It all started with a small group of young girls in Salem Village, led by Betty Paris, the daughter of the town's minister. These girls began exhibiting strange behavior, convulsing, writhing, and babbling incoherently. At first, the town assumed it was some kind of sickness, but soon the phenomenon spread. More girls, then women, began to show similar symptoms. A few claimed they were being attacked by invisible forces, accusing various women of witchcraft. This marked the beginning of a spiral into mass hysteria. The accusers were often young girls or women on the fringes of society, those who had grievances, who felt oppressed or unnoticed, and found an outlet in these terrifying accusations. What drove this paranoia? Was it simply a deep-rooted fear of the unknown, a culture steeped in religious zealotry? Or was there something more to it, something that twisted the minds of an entire village into believing that witchcraft was afoot, infecting everything it touched? The most widely accepted explanation for the outbreak of the trials lies in the religious and social climate of the time. Puritans who had fled religious persecution in Europe were now living in a harsh, unforgiving environment. Life in Salem was brutal. Cold winters, poor harvests, and a community bound by rigid, austere religious beliefs. The Puritans believed in a literal, ever-present struggle between good and evil, with Satan lurking at every corner, waiting for a chance to claim souls. This worldview created a fertile ground for fear to take root. It wasn't just a small group of girls who could be labeled as witches. Anyone who deviated from the norm could become a target. In a society where suspicion ran deep, the lines between the real and the imagined began to blur. However, as the trials escalated, something strange happened. The accusations were no longer confined to the margins of Salem. They began to spread like wildfire, consuming the lives of prominent figures, respected members of the community. Husbands turned on wives, neighbors betrayed neighbors, and the town became gripped by a fear that was palpable. Accusations of witchcraft became a tool for personal gain, revenge, and settling old scores. With each new confession or accusation, the hysteria spiraled further out of control, until the very structure of Salem itself seemed to crumble under the weight of its own fear. At the heart of the trial stood one of its most controversial figures, Reverend Samuel Parris. He was Betty Paris's father, and his own daughter's strange condition seemed to ignite the fire of suspicion that spread through the village. But as the trials began to unfold, Reverend Paris's position was no longer secure. Like many of the accusers, he seemed trapped in the fear he himself had helped cultivate. His authority over the town waned as the trials took on a life of their own, fueled by the fervor of those who believed, some might say needed to believe, that witchcraft was real and that the devil had already found his way into their lives. What makes the Salem witch trials particularly unsettling is the very nature of the accusations. The evidence used to convict alleged witches was flimsy at best. Spectral evidence, or visions of spirits seen only by the accuser, became a primary form of proof. There were no witnesses to the supposed crimes, only the testimonies of those who claimed to see specters or who confessed, often under duress or fear of being accused themselves. The trials quickly became a farce, where logic and reason had no place. It was not about finding the truth. It was about finding someone to blame. The last of the trials took place in October of 1692, but by then the damage had already been done. 20 people had been executed, mostly by hanging, and many others had their lives ruined. either by imprisonment or through the stigma of being associated with the trials. The very fabric of Salem was torn apart by the hysteria, leaving scars that would last for generations. In the years that followed, the trials were gradually denounced as a miscarriage of justice. Many of those involved expressed regret, including Reverend Paris himself, who would later lose his position in Salem. But even as history moved on, the shadow of Salem's hysteria lingered, raising uncomfortable questions that still resonate today. What would cause an entire community to turn on itself so violently, to destroy the lives of so many based on such flimsy accusations? Was it simply a mass psychosis, a collective fever dream of fear, or was there something deeper at play? Could the roots of the trials have been planted in a mix of personal grievances, religious extremism, and the unknown forces that haunted the Puritans' worldview? The story of the Salem Witch Trials remains a haunting one filled with questions that refuse to be answered. Was it a warning about the dangers of mass hysteria, or a reflection of a society that believed too deeply in the unseen? And more importantly, how many more witch hunts, both literal and metaphorical, have we seen throughout history? The truth, like the winds that howled through Salem's woods, seems to slip away with each passing year. An enigma wrapped in a veil of fear. Perhaps as time moves forward, the answers will be revealed. Or perhaps the mystery will remain, forever buried in the ashes of the past. As the year 1718 drew to a close, the northern lands of Sweden were locked in the bitter grip of war. The winds howled through the dense forests, carrying with them the distant echoes of artillery fire from the ongoing campaigns of the Great Northern War. It was a time of peril for the Swedish Empire, but there was a sense of purpose even in the harshest of conditions, as the kingdom was led by its fierce and determined king, Charles XII. Charles XII was a figure of legend, a monarch who had led his nation through one of the most brutal and protracted wars of the time. Known for his military genius, his stubbornness, and his willingness to march into the heart of battle without fear, he was in many ways a king of destiny, seen by his people as both an indomitable leader and a symbol of Sweden's power on the European stage. But one cold night in December 1718, in the midst of the siege of Norway's fortress of Fredrikstad, the mighty king met a sudden and violent end. He was shot. The bullet struck him in the head, taking his life swiftly, leaving the world to wonder who was responsible for the assassination of Charles XII. The place of his death, Fredrikstad Fort, was perched high on a hill overlooking the barren landscape of Norway. The fort itself, built into the jagged rock, was a symbol of military might. Its walls had withstood many sieges, and it was here that Charles XII had gathered his troops, determined to secure victory for Sweden. But that night, as he stood surveying the battlefield from a window, the shot rang out. The bullet, as some have suggested, came from an unseen sniper, likely positioned at a distance. It struck Charles XII in the head, a fatal blow that would end his reign in an instant. The details of the shot, how it was fired, from where and by whom, have remained shrouded in mystery ever since. The official story put forward by Swedish authorities claimed that Charles XII was killed by a stray bullet from one of his own soldiers. It was suggested that the shot came from within the Swedish ranks, a tragic accident born of confusion and the chaos of battle. This theory, however, has never sat comfortably with all who have studied the king's death. For Charles XII was no ordinary ruler, and his death, so sudden, so seemingly out of place, did not match the circumstances of the battle that was unfolding. The first cracks in the official narrative began to appear when rumors of a deliberate assassination emerged. Some suggested that the king had been targeted by enemies within his own court, those who had grown weary of his relentless military campaigns and the toll they were taking on Sweden. Charles XII had, after all, been embroiled in war for years, and his kingdom was exhausted. There were whispers of treachery, of plots to remove the king from power to preserve what remained of Sweden's strength. But who could have orchestrated such a plot, and why would they want to see him dead? Then there was the theory that Charles XII had been murdered by foreign powers, perhaps by the Russians, who had been Sweden's long-standing adversary in the Great Northern War. The possibility that Tsar Peter the Great had somehow orchestrated the king's death from afar was a tantalizing one, given the political landscape of the time. After all, the war was far from over, and the Swedish king's death could have provided a decisive turning point for the Russians, allowing them to seize the advantage. But no concrete evidence ever surfaced to suggest that the Russian Empire had any direct involvement in the assassination. The mystery only deepened when, in the years following the king's death, a group of Swedish officials and historians began to raise the possibility that the shot had been fired by one of Charles XII's own men, an assassin planted within his ranks. It was claimed that during the siege, a disgruntled officer might have had access to the area where the king stood, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Some even suggested that Charles XII's own soldiers, burdened by the prolonged war, had turned against him, embittered by the relentless nature of the campaigns. Others have pointed to the role of the local Norwegian forces. Fredrikstad Fort was held by the Norwegians, who were desperate to defend their land. Some claim that it was not a random shot fired in the chaos of battle, but a calculated move by Norwegian marksmen, eager to end the war and rid themselves of the Swedish king. Yet, this theory too remains without solid evidence, and many question whether the local forces, already overwhelmed by the Swedish siege, would have been able to execute such a precise shot. Even more speculative theories exist exploring the possibility that Charles XII's death was caused by an internal physical ailment. Some historians have suggested that he may have suffered from a medical condition such as a brain aneurysm, which led to his sudden collapse and death, leading to the assumption that a bullet was to blame. Others have even posited that the fatal wound was self-inflicted, possibly due to the king's mental state, worn thin by years of relentless warfare. But none of these theories, whether mainstream or fringe, can fully explain what happened that night. For a king who had lived through numerous battles, who had led his country with unyielding resolve, his death feels inexplicably out of place. The theories surrounding his assassination remain so varied and inconclusive that it's as if the bullet that struck him did not just take his life, but also obscured the truth behind it. Was Charles XII truly assassinated, as some still believe? Or was his death the result of a tragic accident in the chaos of war? A random bullet fired into the fog of battle? Could the answer lie hidden in the shadowy world of political intrigue? A plot carried out by those closest to him, or perhaps by a foreign adversary eager to see him fall? In the end, the assassination of Charles XII remains a mystery, one that continues to puzzle historians and experts alike. And as with so many mysteries of history, the truth may never be fully revealed. What remains is a lingering question. Who really killed Charles XII and why? The answer may be lost to time, concealed by the fog of war, and perhaps, just as with the king himself, hidden from the world forever. As the sun set over the chaotic landscape of Mexico in 1913, the air grew thick with tension. A revolution was unfolding, a violent battle for control between warring factions, each bent on reshaping the future of the country. Amidst the turmoil and upheaval, one man wandered into the shadows of history. His fate was as mysterious as the land he had chosen to traverse. That man was Ambrose Bierce, a renowned American writer, journalist, and war correspondent, whose final days remain one of the most enigmatic disappearances of the 20th century. Bierce, known for his biting cynicism and dark, often macabre tales, had long been fascinated by the brutality of war and human suffering. He was a veteran of the American Civil War, and much of his later writing, such as his famous short story, An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, reflected the psychological toll that war could take on those who lived through it. In the years following the war, Bierce's work became known for its sharp commentary on human nature, particularly the futility and madness of war. By 1913, Bierce was a seasoned traveler, a man who had wandered through the wilds of America and Mexico, observing the world with an eye of detachment, but also with a haunting sense of inevitability. In the fall of 1913, Bierce found himself in Mexico, where the revolution was reaching its fever pitch. He had come to report on the conflict, but there were whispers that his interest in the revolution was more personal than professional. Some say Bierce was searching for the death he had often written about, a death that would allow him to fully understand the absurdity and finality of life. But whatever his reasons, his presence in Mexico would mark the beginning of an unsolved mystery that has haunted historians for over a century. The last known account of Bierce's life was a letter he wrote to a friend dated December 26, 1913. In it, He spoke cryptically about his plans to travel deeper into Mexico, perhaps to join Ponchovia's forces or to simply observe the course of the revolution. He expressed little fear about the danger surrounding him. If anything, his words carried a sense of resignation, as though he had already accepted whatever fate awaited him. In the letter, Bierce hinted that he was ready to face whatever would come, saying, "If I do not come back, you will know what happened." Bierce then vanished. No more letters were received. No more messages were sent. There were no accounts from fellow travelers or correspondents, no official reports. It was as though he had simply ceased to exist. The mystery of his disappearance has since become the stuff of legend, and his name is often grouped with the great unexplained disappearances of the early 20th century. But unlike some of these cases, Bierce's disappearance remains stubbornly unclear, with no concrete evidence to explain where he went or why. Some of the earliest theories suggested that Bierce was murdered, a victim of the revolution's chaotic violence. Mexico in 1913 was a nation in the throes of political upheaval, where leaders and soldiers alike had little regard for the lives of foreigners. It is entirely possible, some argue, that Bierce encountered the wrong group of men, perhaps bandits or rival revolutionaries, and met a violent end, his body left to be claimed by the land he had come to know so well. Others have suggested that Bierce's disappearance was not the result of violence, but of his own choosing. Some historians speculate that the writer, weary of life and seeking an end to his personal suffering, deliberately disappeared into the wilderness, never intending to return. Bierce had often spoken of death in his writings, not as a mysterious event, but as a natural, inevitable conclusion. Could it be that he had decided to vanish, to disappear from the world, as he had so often depicted in his work? If so, why would he leave no trace, no explanation for his departure? His final letter suggests that he knew the end was near. But why would he leave his friends and family without any closure? There is also the theory that Bierce's disappearance was simply a matter of misfortune, that he met his end in some tragic, unremarkable way. Mexico's rugged terrain was unforgiving, and Bierce was known to have traveled alone, at times deep into remote and dangerous areas. Could he have fallen victim to the natural dangers of the land, lost in the wilderness, succumbing to exposure, or attacked by wild animals? The fact that he left no clear trail only makes this theory seem more plausible. Perhaps the most intriguing theory, though, is the one that suggests Bierce's disappearance was not a disappearance at all, but a carefully orchestrated act of self-imposed oblivion. Some have argued that Bierce, tired of the world and of his own fame, deliberately staged his vanishing. After all, Bierce had spent much of his career exploring themes of death, the nature of reality, and the fragility of human existence. Could it be that the ultimate act of defiance, the disappearance into thin air, was the final step in his intellectual and existential journey? As time passed, the theories continued to multiply. Some suggested that Bierce had been captured by Pancho Villa's men, taken as a prisoner, or perhaps even killed by them. Others believe that he may have fallen into the hands of one of the many revolutionary factions and was either killed or simply lost to the annals of history. Some, even more fantastical, have posited that Bierce chose to live out the remainder of his days in secret, either in Mexico or elsewhere, perhaps even under a new identity, continuing to write under the radar, away from the public eye. The truth is, we may never know what truly happened to Ambrose Bierce in those final days of 1913. His disappearance remains one of the greatest literary mysteries of the 20th century, a question that refuses to be answered. Was he a victim of war, a man choosing his own death, or someone who simply wanted to leave the world behind in the most definitive way possible? Theories may come and go, but the truth, like the writer himself, seems to have slipped into the void, forever out of reach. Perhaps Ambrose Bierce found the final answer he had been searching for, a disappearance so complete that it leaves no trace behind. And perhaps in that void, the mystery of his fate will remain, as elusive as the words he once wrote. In the cold, fog-laden streets of the small town of Perleberg, Germany, on a moonless night in 1809, a mystery unfolded that would haunt history for centuries. The darkness of the night was broken only by the dim glow of carriage lanterns swaying with the rhythm of the horse's gallop. A solitary figure was in transit, a man named Benjamin Bathurst, an English diplomat well known in his circles, returning from a meeting with the Prussian court. His mission, an ordinary one in a turbulent era, was shrouded by the uncertainty of the Napoleonic Wars, which were engulfing much of Europe in chaos. At around 10 p.m. on November 9th, Bathurst's journey would take an eerie turn. As he approached the village, traveling in his carriage, a violent storm of wind and fog descended on the road. The weather was bad, but not unusual for the season. The carriage slowed, and at that moment, Bathurst, clad in his traveling clothes, stepped out briefly to attend to the horses. As he did, something extraordinary and terrifying occurred. When his companion turned around to speak to him, Bathurst had vanished. There was no sound, no trace. It was as though he had been swallowed by the earth itself. The first instinct was simple. He had fallen into a ditch, or was perhaps caught in the elements, a victim of the storm. But this was not the case. There were no signs of his footsteps, no traces of his body in the mud or the grass. Just a momentary glance away from the carriage, and Bathurst was gone, disappeared without a trace. At first, this might have seemed like an accident, a victim of the night and the storm. However, as the hours passed and the search began, the mystery only deepened. No clues emerged. His clothes, his personal effects, and his belongings remained inside the carriage. Bathurst himself, where had he gone? Had he simply vanished into thin air? Was he a victim of some sinister force? Or did something more peculiar and elusive explain his sudden disappearance? To this day, no one knows for sure what happened to Benjamin Bathurst that night. The disappearance was widely covered in the newspapers of the time, but it soon fell into the realm of eerie lore, a tale whispered about for generations. For some, the theories surrounding Bathurst's vanishing were as strange as the event itself. The first theory that circulated was that he had been abducted. But who could have taken him? The area was not known for bandit activity, and the carriage was found undisturbed. Bathurst had no known enemies, and the people who were with him could vouch for the fact that he had not been followed or harassed. Some suggested that a group of marauders or spies from the Napoleonic forces might have been responsible, hoping to capture a British diplomat for reasons unknown. Yet no ransom was ever demanded, and no body or trace of him was ever found. It was as though he had simply vanished into the night without a sound. The theories became even stranger. Some suggested that Bath had staged his own disappearance driven by a personal crisis or a desire to escape his current life. But this theory is met with skepticism. Bathurst had a promising career, a family, and a secure future. Why would he suddenly choose to leave it all behind without a word to anyone? And if he had truly planned it, why leave all his belongings behind in the carriage as though in a hurry yet without a trace? Another speculative theory revolves around the possibility of a time slip or dimensional rift. This was an idea that began to circulate in the early 20th century, suggesting that Bathurst might have been transported unknowingly into a different realm or dimension. Was there something strange about the weather that night? Something that created a rift between parallel worlds, allowing him to vanish from the physical plane? The idea of time slips has been discussed throughout history, and though there is no scientific evidence to support such a claim, it has nonetheless captivated the imaginations of those seeking an answer beyond the mundane. Others have considered the supernatural angle, proposing that Bathurst may have encountered a ghostly apparition, a malevolent force from the past that had reached out from the depths of history. Some have even suggested that Bathurst's sudden disappearance was related to an ancient curse or a connection to the area's dark history. Yet such theories, although intriguing, remain rooted in speculation, offering no definitive explanation. The more conventional explanation, often cited by historians, points to the possibility of a practical, though still unnerving, occurrence: the idea of Bathurst having been lost to some kind of criminal activity, either by a local thief or an unknown assailant who had been hiding in the woods or nearby. The nature of the event, the lack of sound, the absence of struggle, and the peculiar timing suggest that if someone had been involved, it had been a meticulously planned act. The theory of an ambush is feasible in a time of war where tensions ran high and espionage was rampant. Still, there is one chilling possibility that continues to disturb those who have studied the disappearance in depth: that Benjamin Bathurst somehow became a victim of the very forces he was trying to navigate. As a diplomat in an era rife with espionage, betrayal, and political instability, Bathurst was a man positioned on the edge of dangerous intrigues. Could it be that his disappearance was tied to something far more covert? A secret assassination perhaps orchestrated by unseen enemies within the political imaginations of the time. Some speculate that Bierce had gotten too close to a political secret, and his vanishing was a calculated move by those who needed him silenced. And then there are the theories that speculate more freely. Could it have been a case of mistaken identity? Perhaps someone else being taken instead of Bierce? Was there a case of mistaken identity? Or was it a prank gone horribly wrong? A hoax staged by those around him for reasons that remain obscure. Despite the various theories, none can fully account for the strange circumstances surrounding Benjamin Bathurst's disappearance. No body was ever found. No trace of his existence has ever been uncovered, not even in the local archives. Some have suggested that his remains might have been hidden, buried deep in the woods, but nothing definitive has ever surfaced. As the years passed, Bierce's disappearance became one of those unsolvable mysteries lingering in the minds of historians and amateurs alike. What could have happened to him on that cold, foggy night? Was it an act of foul play, a strange and unspeakable crime, or something even more extraordinary? Why, after all this time, does the mystery remain unsolved, untouched by the passage of history? As with so many of history's greatest disappearances, the truth is likely to remain forever elusive. Was Bierce lost to the world by human hands or by something far beyond our understanding? That question, like so many others, remains buried in the fog of history, waiting for an answer that may never come. And perhaps in the end, that is the most terrifying mystery of all. In the quiet fog-drenched streets of Nuremberg, Germany, in the spring of 1828, a young man appeared, a figure whose very existence would spark a wave of curiosity, disbelief, and mystery that has endured for nearly 2 centuries. He was Kaspar Hauser, a 16-year-old who seemingly emerged from nowhere, carrying with him not just the weight of his own confusion, but a riddle that no one has been able to solve. Kaspar appeared in the heart of the city with no explanation, no known family, and no identity. His sudden arrival into Nuremberg's bustling streets was accompanied by a story that defied all logic, a tale that would lead to more questions than answers. He claimed to have spent the first 16 years of his life in total isolation, locked away in a dark, small cell with no human contact. His only companion was a man who, he said, would feed him and occasionally speak to him. But even the name of this mysterious man remained unknown. Kaspar was unable to read or write, and his mannerisms were that of a much younger child. He could barely communicate, struggling to form coherent sentences, and his body showed signs of severe neglect, his legs weak and underdeveloped, his skin pale and thin from lack of exposure to sunlight. When Kaspar arrived, he had no idea who he was. He couldn't even provide a name. In his hands, he held a letter sealed and addressed to a Mr. Lord, which contained little more than a cryptic message. The child is the son of a noble family. This letter would become the only clue. But it offered no clear answers, just more questions. At first, many people believed that Kaspar might be a prince, a lost heir to some distant European throne, hidden away for reasons that only a select few could understand. Some saw him as a victim of kidnapping, perhaps a child taken from a noble family and kept in captivity for years. Others, however, speculated that he was part of an elaborate hoax, a boy deliberately kept in isolation, trained to believe a false narrative. His identity obscured by the very circumstances of his arrival. The more questions people asked, the more the mystery deepened. For months, Kaspar's story captivated Germany. People marveled at his inability to function in society, his strange behavior, and his utter ignorance of the world around him. He could not recognize familiar objects, could not comprehend basic social norms, and was often seen staring in confusion at the world he was now expected to live in. His innocence was so pronounced that it almost seemed unreal. The theories surrounding his identity multiplied. Some believed Kaspar Hauser was a prince, perhaps from a royal family that had been in hiding, a victim of political intrigue or a dynastic struggle. One particularly persistent theory proposed that he was the son of the Grand Duke of Baden, a noble family that had fallen into disarray after the death of the Duke. It was said that Kaspar had been kept in confinement as part of a political plot to secure his safety or to hide him from the world. The speculation seemed to hold some weight, as a prince or noble child would have likely been isolated for his protection in such tumultuous times. Others suggested that Hauser's arrival was not one of royal descent, but one of tragic deception. Could he have been a pawn in a darker scheme, manipulated and confined to a solitary existence for years? Perhaps as part of a plot to gain attention or manipulate those around him? His reclusive nature, his confusion, and his seeming vulnerability left many wondering if he was not a prince at all, but rather a young man brought into a game of psychological manipulation. There were also those who wondered if Kaspar Hauser was simply a figment of something more sinister, the result of a madman's machinations. Some speculated that he was part of a cruel experiment, a human subject used to test the limits of isolation and neglect. His behavior was so childlike that some began to consider the possibility that he had never known the outside world at all, that he had been raised in some isolated environment where he was kept apart from civilization entirely. Could it be that his mind had been so severely stunted by this total absence of socialization that he had not even learned how to speak until he was forced to do so after his emergence into the outside world? And then there was the possibility that Kaspar Hauser was someone entirely different, an ordinary boy with a strange yet deliberate story. Some historians suggest that he may have been the product of a fabricated narrative designed to create sympathy and wonderment. There were even reports of strange people trying to use Hauser for their own purposes, possibly hoping to turn his mystery into a money-making opportunity. If this was the case, then Kaspar's story was less about his true identity and more about how people could manipulate others for their own gain. Despite the theories that flooded Nuremberg, one thing became increasingly clear. Kaspar Hauser was not a typical boy. His arrival had disrupted a world that could not understand him, and his mystery continued to grow with every new twist in his story. As time passed, Hauser began to communicate more effectively, revealing more about his past. He spoke of a man who had kept him in captivity, telling him little except for the occasional cryptic remark. He spoke of the small, dark room where he had spent most of his life, his memories of the past fading with every passing day. But just as the world seemed to close in on the answer to his identity, a shocking twist occurred. In 1833, after living in Nuremberg for nearly 5 years, Kaspar Hauser was found wounded in the streets. He had been stabbed in the chest, and though he was still alive when found, he died shortly afterward. His last words were cryptic. "I was stabbed by a man with a black handkerchief." The mystery of his death deepened the question surrounding his life. Was this the end of the story, or just another part of the puzzle that had been left unsolved? Who killed Kaspar Hauser and why? Was it someone who wanted to silence him forever to keep him from revealing the truth of his identity? Or was his death part of a larger conspiracy, a shadowy plot orchestrated by those who sought to erase any trace of the boy's existence? Some suggest that his death was a tragic and deliberate act to keep his origins a secret. Others believe it may have been a random attack, an act of violence that had no deeper meaning. And yet, the questions persist. Who was Kaspar Hauser? A prince? A victim of political intrigue? A man caught in the tides of history and fate, trying to make sense of a world he had never known? Perhaps after all these years, his true identity is forever hidden, obscured by layers of mystery and speculation. As with so many other unsolved disappearances and enigmatic figures throughout history, Kaspar Hauser's story is a riddle that refuses to be solved. Could he have been the son of a noble family, held captive for reasons we will never understand? Or was he simply a product of an elaborate hoax, a man whose very existence was bound up in the mystery itself? The answers remain elusive, trapped in the shadows of history, and perhaps they always will be. What then was the true story of Kaspar Hauser, and why does the mystery surrounding his life and death continue to haunt us? Only time and the slow unraveling of history's secrets may offer us the answers. In the autumn of 1872, a ship drifted alone in the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, its sails flapping listlessly in the wind, the sea surrounding it as silent and indifferent as the mysteries it held within. The Mary Celeste, a brigantine vessel, was found abandoned yet strangely intact. No sign of struggle, no evidence of piracy or violence. There it floated, an enigma that has captivated imaginations for over a century. The ship had been on a routine voyage, traveling from New York to Genoa, Italy, carrying a cargo of industrial alcohol. On board were the captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their young daughter, and a crew of 7 men. Mary Celeste was no stranger to the seas. She was a well-built ship, sturdy and reliable. Her crew had been experienced, her captain known for his professionalism. But when the ship was found, the scene was chillingly ordinary. The sails were set, The cargo was mostly intact, and the food was still cooking on the stove. The last log entry, dated November 24th, just 10 days before the ship was discovered adrift, marked the final trace of the crew's existence. Upon investigation, it became apparent that something catastrophic had occurred. But what exactly had happened was unknown. The ship's longboat, the small vessel used for short trips to shore, was missing, as were the crew members and passengers. Their personal belongings were gone, but the ship itself remained eerily undisturbed. There were no signs of struggle or violence, no blood or physical evidence that would suggest a violent end. The ship was not damaged, and there was no indication of foul play. The only clue that could point to a cause was the ship's log, which noted that the ship had been sailing smoothly when the final entry was made and that there was no mention of distress. How does a ship with all its people aboard simply vanish from the decks, leaving behind an otherwise intact vessel? What force or perhaps series of events could have led to such an inexplicable disappearance? The unanswered questions piled up, and over time, a series of theories emerged, each attempting to offer a plausible explanation for the events that occurred aboard the Mary Celeste. The most widely accepted theory suggests that a natural disaster may have occurred. Perhaps a sudden and violent storm caused the crew to abandon ship in haste. The possibility of a waterspout, a rare and violent phenomenon that can form without warning, has been considered. Waterspouts are capable of overturning ships or forcing sailors into immediate panic. But why? If the ship had indeed encountered such a storm, would the crew not attempt to save themselves by staying on board? Why abandon the ship when there was no obvious sign of serious damage? Another theory posits that the ship was struck by a terrifying and mysterious phenomenon known as spontaneous combustion. It's a rare occurrence in which a chemical reaction in certain cargo, such as the alcohol the Mary Celeste was carrying, causes a fire to ignite. The ship's cargo hold contained barrels of industrial alcohol, which was highly flammable. Proponents of this theory suggest that the fumes from the cargo may have ignited, causing a small fire below deck. In a panic, the crew could have taken to the lifeboat, abandoning ship in haste to escape what they believed was an imminent explosion. But in this case, the ship's damage didn't match the severity of such a catastrophe. The ship was found to be relatively undamaged, and the fire had apparently been put out. Was it possible that the crew mistook a small fire for a far greater danger, abandoning the ship prematurely? A more intriguing, albeit less likely, theory is that the crew members had been affected by some form of mass hysteria. The idea of group panic has long been discussed as an explanation for inexplicable events. Could the crew, under stress from prolonged exposure to the dangers of sea travel, have experienced a collective breakdown? Was it possible that the Mary Celeste's crew abandoned ship in a moment of irrational fear, thinking they were in mortal danger when there was no actual threat? There's no concrete evidence to support this theory, but it offers a compelling idea that the mind under the pressure of isolation and stress might make drastic decisions that seem utterly illogical in hindsight. The most haunting possibility is that the disappearance of the crew was the result of foul play. While there were no signs of violence, the possibility of an onboard mutiny or a personal dispute between the captain and his crew cannot be ruled out entirely. In the chaotic, lawless environment of the sea, there were often conflicts that could escalate quickly. Yet the absence of any physical evidence, such as blood, damaged possessions, or signs of a struggle, makes this theory seem improbable. If the crew had turned against their captain, why would they have left the ship completely undamaged? Another possibility that has been considered is that Mary Celeste was a victim of piracy, though it too seems implausible. If pirates had boarded the ship, why would they have left it in pristine condition? The ship's cargo was intact, and nothing of significant value appeared to be stolen. Pirates, in most cases, would have taken what they could for profit, leaving destruction and looting in their wake. But in this case, nothing was taken and no signs of piracy were found. One of the more speculative theories involves the paranormal. Some have suggested that the Mary Celeste was cursed, a victim of supernatural forces that led to the crew's disappearance. Cursed ships are a long-standing element of maritime folklore, and the Mary Celeste has over the years become an icon in the world of ghostly mysteries. Could the ship have been doomed from the start, haunted by some malevolent force that claimed the crew, leaving the ship behind as a silent witness to its curse? While this theory is based purely on superstition, it speaks to the larger mystery of Mary Celeste, a story that is not only about what happened to the crew, But why such an inexplicable event continues to captivate the imagination? And then there are the more fringe theories, those that lean into the possibility of the unknown. Some suggest that Mary Celeste was the victim of a secret military experiment, or that she had somehow crossed paths with a phenomenon not yet understood by science. Could the crew have been swept into a mysterious, invisible event, something akin to a time warp, or perhaps an encounter with an unknown force that altered the course of their lives in ways we cannot yet comprehend? As time has passed, the mystery of the Mary Celeste has only grown, and each new theory seems to raise more questions than it answers. Why did the crew abandon ship without warning, leaving behind a vessel that showed no immediate signs of damage or danger? Why were there no clear clues to explain what happened? What were they running from? Or was something even more mysterious at play? To this day, the fate of the Mary Celeste and its crew remains one of history's most compelling and terrifying maritime mysteries. No matter how many theories are proposed, the truth remains hidden beneath the waves, as elusive as the ship that once sailed across them. And so, as we peer into the abyss of time, we are left to wonder what really happened on board that fateful ship. Was it a natural disaster, a tragic error, or something far more sinister? The Mary Celeste story endures not just as a tale of the sea, but as a riddle that continues to challenge our understanding of the world. The cold, unforgiving expanse of the Canadian Arctic, its icy winds slicing through the air, its glaciers and pack ice stretching endlessly into the horizon. It's a landscape of silence, a place where time seems to stand still, where nothing moves except the wind and the shifting ice. In this bleak, inhospitable wilderness, the fate of a great expedition vanished without a trace, leaving behind one of the most chilling mysteries in the annals of exploration. In 1845, Sir John Franklin, a seasoned British naval officer, set out on what was meant to be a pioneering journey to find the fabled Northwest Passage, an elusive route that would link the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the icy maze of Canada's Arctic archipelago. Franklin's expedition was equipped with two ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, each well-stocked and prepared for what was expected to be a challenging but manageable expedition. There were 129 men in total, including officers, engineers, and sailors, all hand-picked for their expertise and experience in polar exploration. The ship sailed from England in May of that year, and their progress was documented as they made their way through the icy waters of the Canadian Arctic. Initial reports suggested that Franklin and his men were moving through the landscape with confidence, their ships expertly navigating the frozen seas. But by the following year, any word from the expedition ceased entirely. No more letters, no more messages, just the quiet, impenetrable void of the Arctic. And then in 1848, the British government, growing anxious over the prolonged silence, launched a series of search expeditions. What they would eventually uncover only deepened the mystery. The search teams found no trace of the expedition in the areas they had been expected to reach. The ships Erebus and Terror were never seen again, until 2014 when the wreckage of Erebus was discovered beneath the ice. A ghostly relic of a once vibrant journey now resting on the ocean floor. But what had happened to the men aboard, and why had they disappeared so completely? For decades, no answers came, and the mystery of the Franklin expedition remained one of the most perplexing and eerie cases in the history of exploration. What happened to Sir John Franklin and his crew? Why did a well-prepared expedition with one of the most experienced captains of the time simply vanish into the Arctic ice? The search for answers began soon after the disappearance. In 1854, a rescue mission led by Sir Francis Leopold McClintock finally located the first significant clues: a series of abandoned camps, half-frozen skeletons, and journals that had been left behind in a desperate effort to survive. Among the remnants was the first real evidence of the crew's grim fate. A message hastily scribbled by Franklin's second-in-command, Francis Crosher. The note described how the expedition had become trapped by ice, how they had been unable to proceed further, and how Franklin had died during the ordeal. The last entry in the journal was a haunting one, an acknowledgement that the men had been forced to abandon their ships and embark on a long trek across the ice. But nothing beyond that. The men were simply gone. But what followed was a disturbing series of discoveries that would only deepen the mystery. In the years that followed, more bodies were found, some showing signs of physical deterioration, some showing evidence of scurvy and starvation. It was clear that the men had endured immense hardship, but what they had endured was far worse than the elements. Some of the bodies were found with their limbs broken, suggesting they had resorted to extreme measures in their attempt to survive. Worse still, there was evidence that the men had begun to turn on one another in their desperation, signs that pointed toward cannibalism. The discovery of cannibalism in such an extreme and desperate context raises several questions. Had the men simply run out of food in their attempt to survive the Arctic winter? Was their situation so dire that they had no choice but to resort to such a horrific practice to stay alive? Or had they been faced with an even more nightmarish fate, something beyond the cold, the hunger, and the ice? Something that pushed them to the very limits of human endurance and morality. Several theories have been put forth to explain the disaster that befell Franklin's expedition. Though none have provided definitive answers, the most widely accepted explanation is that the ships became trapped in the ice. The men were caught in the frozen waters, unable to move forward, unable to return. This would have left them stranded in the Arctic wilderness with only the limited supplies on board to sustain them. As the weeks turned into months, the men would have faced an unimaginable struggle to survive, with no means of escape and no hope of rescue. As they waited for the ice to break, their physical condition would have deteriorated rapidly and the arrival of spring would have come too late. The theory of the trapped expedition is supported by historical accounts of Franklin's ships, which were known to be sturdy and well-constructed. Erebus and Terror were well-equipped for Arctic exploration, and the crew had everything they needed for a long stay in the ice. But no one could have predicted that the ice would remain so impenetrable for so long. As months stretched into years, supplies ran low, and starvation began to set in. The physical toll on the men was devastating. Scurvy, frostbite, and exhaustion took their toll. Some theorists suggest that the men, in their deteriorating mental and physical state, lost all sense of hope, and that the cannibalism found among the bodies was the result of a desperate struggle for survival driven by the overwhelming urge to stay alive. Another possibility that has been suggested is that the crew's fate was not caused by the ice alone, but by a combination of factors. Some believe that the men may have been struck by a mysterious illness, one that debilitated them and made it impossible to continue their journey. The Arctic region is known for its harsh conditions, and disease was a constant threat during the era of exploration. Could the men have contracted an illness that left them too weak to continue? The idea that an unseen enemy, such as an unknown bacteria or virus, could have played a role in their demise is disturbing, but it cannot be entirely ruled out. There are also those who speculate that the men may have encountered something even more supernatural. Given the mystery of their sudden disappearance, it's no surprise that some theories have leaned into the realm of the unexplained. Could the Franklin expedition have been the victim of some mysterious otherworldly force, perhaps something tied to the Arctic landscape itself? A strange energy or phenomenon that interfered with the men's progress and ultimately led to their tragic end? This theory remains firmly in the realm of speculation. But in a story as haunting as this, it's easy to see how such ideas would emerge. Despite the numerous theories, no one truly knows what happened to the Franklin expedition. While modern expeditions have uncovered clues and wreckages, no one can say with certainty what caused the demise of Sir John Franklin and his crew. Was it a slow, agonizing death from starvation and disease? Or was it a sudden, violent event that claimed them without warning? And if they did resort to cannibalism, was it purely a result of desperation? Or was there something deeper, more unsettling at play? The disappearance of the Franklin expedition continues to be one of history's most chilling and unsolved mysteries. A tragic story of human endurance, failure, and loss. Though the icy waters of the Arctic have revealed fragments of the past, the full truth remains buried beneath the snow and ice, hidden from view, waiting to be uncovered. Perhaps in the end, the Franklin expedition is a reminder of the unknowable dangers of the world, an enduring enigma that may never reveal its true answer. On the morning of February 9, 1855, the residents of a small rural area in Devon, England, awoke to something that defied explanation. An eerie and perplexing sight that would soon stir imaginations and spark endless speculation. Across the snow-covered fields spanning some 40 miles of the countryside, strange hoof-like prints appeared as if from nowhere. These tracks were unlike anything the people had ever seen before. Each print was deeply embedded in the snow, measuring around 4 in long, 2 in wide, and 10 in apart. Most curiously, They seemed to march in a perfectly straight line regardless of the landscape. Passing through walls, over rooftops, and even across rivers, the prints appeared to be from a creature with cloven hooves, similar to that of a goat or horse, but far too large for any known animal in the area. There was no visible sign of a creature, a body, a trail, or any indication that something had passed through the fields in such a deliberate, methodical manner. It was as though the prints had been made by some unseen force, stepping lightly on the earth and leaving only the imprints behind. This strange phenomenon was soon dubbed the Devil's Footprints. It didn't take long for locals to begin spinning their own theories about the origin of the mysterious tracks. Many were quick to associate the event with the supernatural, and as word of the strange marks spread, so too did the rumors. Some said the footprints were the work of the devil himself, who had descended upon the countryside to sow chaos and terror among the people. Others believed the tracks could be the mark of a demon or some other evil force whose unholy presence had disturbed the quiet of the night. In a time where superstition and fear of the unknown held sway over the imagination, these ideas found fertile ground in the minds of the people. But even as the supernatural theories began to take hold, there were those who attempted to explain the phenomenon in more practical terms. Some suggested that the tracks were the result of a prank, a hoax of some sort, perhaps a group of mischievous individuals out to cause confusion and fright. The oddity of the prints, however, made this theory difficult to accept. No one could explain how a group of pranksters could have created such an intricate and far-reaching series of tracks, and the mystery deepened further when no one could find any trace of a creature that might have left the marks. One more down-to-earth explanation came from some of the more logical minds in the community. It was suggested that the prints could have been made by a common animal, such as a dog or some form of domestic livestock, though the size of the prints didn't match any known animals in the area. Still, this theory did little to answer why the prints seemed to cover such an impossibly large area in a single night, nor why they seemed to appear and disappear without any trace of an animal. Despite these efforts to rationalize the mystery, the devil's footprints have never been satisfactorily explained. To this day, the prints remains a ghostly reminder of an event that defied logic, reason, and science. As with many unexplained phenomena throughout history, the mystery of the devil's footprints grew more compelling as the years went by. But even as the years turned into decades, the footprints continued to be a subject of fascination and intrigue for those who sought to uncover the truth. Over time, a more scientific approach was taken to the phenomenon. Some researchers began to study the prints more closely, seeking clues that might reveal their true origin. One possibility that has been suggested is that the prints were created by a rare meteorological event known as frost fairies or frost vapor. These natural phenomena occur when moisture in the air freezes and forms delicate snowflake-like crystals on the ground. In rare instances, this frost can create patterns that resemble footprints. While this theory might explain some of the odd characteristics of the prints, such as their precise and seemingly impossible route, it fails to account for the fact that the prints were deeply imprinted into the snow, as if they had been made by a solid, heavy creature. Frost vapor by nature would not leave such a mark on the ground. Another theory suggests that the footprints might have been made by an animal, perhaps a large unseen creature whose footprints were so deeply embedded in the snow that they left a lasting impression. This animal, it was speculated, might have been a type of ox or large mammal that wandered into the area under cover of darkness. Some have even proposed that the prints might have been left by a kangaroo, an exotic animal that was being transported across England at the time. Yet, despite this explanation, it seems unlikely that such an animal could have traveled undetected for so long, or that its tracks could have covered such a vast area without any clear sign of its movement. In more recent times, some have suggested that the devil's footprints were the result of a mass hysteria, a shared delusion that spread among the people who saw the tracks, distorting their perceptions of reality. The psychological concept of collective hallucinations, where large groups of people experience the same hallucination or misperception of reality, is one theory that has been raised to explain the phenomenon. Yet this theory still fails to explain why the tracks were so meticulously formed and why they covered such a vast and seemingly impossible distance. There are also more speculative ideas surrounding the devil's footprints, particularly among those with an interest in the paranormal. Some have suggested that the tracks were not made by any known creature, but rather by something far more mysterious. Could they have been left by a time traveler, an entity from another dimension, or even an extraterrestrial being. The bizarre, unexplained nature of the prints has led some to draw comparisons to other mysterious footprints found in different parts of the world, tracks that seemingly appear without reason and vanish without a trace. These theories, while intriguing, remain firmly in the realm of speculation, but the devil's footprints have in some ways resisted explanation. The nature of the tracks, their precise formation, and their strange, inexplicable appearance in a small rural area in the dead of winter all point to something far beyond the ordinary. It is easy to dismiss the event as the product of local folklore, superstition, and fear, but in doing so, we may overlook the unsettling reality that there are still many things about our world that we do not understand. Why did the devil's footprints appear that winter? And why have they remained so tantalizingly out of reach? What truly happened in Devon on that cold February morning? And what secrets did those strange princes leave behind in the snow? For all the theories, the evidence remains scant, and the mystery is as chilling as it was the day the prints were first discovered. The devil's footprints may have been left behind as a fleeting reminder of an unknown presence or force, something that to this day we cannot fully comprehend. The tracks have long since melted away, but the questions they raised still linger in the minds of those who wonder what was really behind the footprints. And what might they still reveal? On the evening of October 3, 1849, the streets of Baltimore were thick with fog, the air damp and still. The city, then a bustling port town, was shrouded in darkness as a solitary figure stumbled through the alleys. His clothes were disheveled, his face pale and gaunt. His name was Edgar Allan Poe, and he was barely recognizable. Shaken, delirious, and seemingly lost in a haze of confusion. Just days earlier, Poe had been found wandering in a state of near catatonia, incoherent and unable to explain how he had ended up in such a condition. He was discovered in the entrance of a tavern, muttering to himself and wearing someone else's clothes. After being taken to a nearby hospital, he died under mysterious circumstances on October 7, 1849. His final days were marked by a cloud of strange behaviors and unexplained events that have baffled historians and medical professionals alike. What happened to Edgar Allan Poe in those last days of his life? How did a man renowned for his mastery of Gothic horror and dark tales meet such a tragic, eerie end? And why nearly 2 centuries later does his death remain one of the most debated and unresolved mysteries in literary history? Poe was not just a man of his time, but a product of it, an enigmatic figure whose life seemed to be as dark and troubled as the stories he told. Born in 1809, he was known for his poems, short stories, and the tales of terror that captured the public's imagination. He was a writer whose work seemed to transcend the boundaries of the human experience, offering a chilling glimpse into the psyche of madness, death, and despair. His most famous works, The Telltale Heart, The Fall of the House of Usher, and The Raven, echoed themes of obsession, dread, and the fragility of the human mind. Poe's life in many ways mirrored the very themes he explored in his writing. It was filled with tragedy, loss, and struggle. But it was his final days that have left the deepest mark on his legacy. In the years leading up to his death, Poe had experienced a series of personal tragedies. He had lost his young wife, Virginia Clem, to tuberculosis in 1847, an event that left him emotionally shattered. He struggled with bouts of depression, alcoholism, and financial hardship. Yet, despite his struggles, he was still a prominent figure in the literary world, admired for his genius and his ability to evoke terror and fascination in his readers. It was in 1849 that Poe found himself on a journey to Philadelphia, likely seeking some respite or escape from his inner turmoil. His final journey began in Richmond, Virginia, where he had been visiting friends. He planned to travel to Philadelphia to work on an editing job, but he never made it. By the time he reached Baltimore, something had gone horribly wrong. What happened during the days he spent wandering the streets in a fevered daze? Was he the victim of some sinister plot, or was his death simply the result of his personal demons finally catching up with him? The official cause of Poe's death was listed as congestion of the brain, but this diagnosis has always been met with skepticism. How could a man who had been in relatively good health suddenly fall into such a dramatic state of disarray? The symptoms that led to Poe's final decline, confusion, delirium, and an inability to communicate coherently, did not align with a simple case of brain congestion. His doctors, perplexed by his condition, could not agree on what had caused his rapid deterioration. Over the years, many theories have emerged to explain Poe's mysterious death, each more intriguing and more unsettling than the last. One of the earliest and most widely circulated explanations was that Poe's death was the result of alcoholism. Poe was known to have struggled with alcohol addiction throughout his life, and some have suggested that he died after a heavy drinking binge that left him debilitated and delirious. However, this theory is complicated by the fact that there was no clear evidence that he had been intoxicated when he was found. In fact, his behavior seemed far more erratic than what would be expected from someone simply suffering from a drunken stupor. And while Poe had certainly been known to drink, it seems unlikely that alcohol alone could explain his bizarre state in the days leading up to his death. Another theory which has gained traction in recent years is that Poe was the victim of coup hooping, a form of election day fraud that was prevalent in 19th century America. Couping involved forcing a person, often someone from a lower social class, to vote multiple times for a particular candidate, sometimes at the point of a gun. Victims of coping were often drugged, beaten, and made to wander the streets in a disoriented state. Some researchers suggest that Poe may have been a victim of this practice, dragged into a tavern and forced to drink in order to keep him subdued while his vote was manipulated. His symptoms of confusion and incoherence could be consistent with the effects of being drugged or intoxicated against his will. But even this theory leaves us with unanswered questions. How could Poe, a man known for his sharp intellect and creativity, be so easily manipulated by those who would use him for their own purposes? And why, after such an ordeal, did he die under such mysterious circumstances without any witnesses who could shed light on the events that transpired? A more sinister theory proposes that Poe was murdered. Some have suggested that the writer was the target of a deliberate act of violence, either by a vengeful individual or as part of a larger conspiracy. This theory posits that Poe's death was not the result of an accident, illness, or personal struggle, but rather the consequence of someone who had reasons to silence him. Poe's biting wit, his public criticisms of other literary figures, and his outspoken personality had earned him both admirers and enemies, and it's conceivable that one of those enemies might have sought to harm him. However, no direct evidence has ever surfaced to support this idea, and it remains a speculative possibility rather than a concrete explanation. There are also those who consider the possibility that Poe's death was related to his mental health. His writings often dwelled on themes of madness and despair, and some have speculated that Poe's own descent into insanity may have played a role in his demise. Could his mental state have become so fragile that it led him to make irrational choices, perhaps even contributing to his own death? This theory, like many others, raises as many questions as it answers. Was Poe's condition the result of an internal struggle, or was it a reaction to the events around him? Perhaps the most unsettling possibility of all is the suggestion that Poe's death was caused by something far beyond his control. A supernatural force, perhaps, or even an ancient curse. While this theory lies squarely in the realm of the speculative and the fantastical, it remains an intriguing aspect of the Poe mystery. After all, the man who wrote The Fall of the House of Usher and the Black Cat was no stranger to the eerie and the unknown. And it's easy to see why some would be drawn to the idea that his life and death was bound by forces beyond the mortal realm. As the years have passed, the death of Edgar Allan Poe has become more than just a historical event. It has become a symbol of the unexplained, the mysterious, and the unsettling nature of existence itself. What truly happened in those final days of Poe's life? Was he the victim of foul play or simply a man undone by his own inner turmoil? Was he caught in a web of sinister conspiracies, or was his death the tragic result of his own deteriorating health and mind? We may never know the answers, but the mystery of Edgar Allan Poe's death endures just as his stories and poems continue to haunt us, revealing a world where the line between reality and madness is often indistinguishable. As we reflect on the life and death of this literary giant, we are reminded that some mysteries are never meant to be solved, and perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain forever unsolved, lurking just beyond the reach of reason. In the early hours of December 15, 1900, a steamer called the Arctur passed through the stormy seas near the Flanns, a remote group of islands off the west coast of Scotland. The crew of the ship noticed something unusual. The lighthouse at Moor, the largest island in the group, was dark. No light guided their way through the treacherous waters, which was strange because the lighthouse was always manned, its beam a constant, ever-watchful presence against the rising tides. The storm was fierce, but not unusual for that time of year, and the fact that the lighthouse wasn't operating seemed out of place. Later that day, a relief ship, the Hesperus, was dispatched to check on the lighthouse. When it arrived, the crew found that the light had been extinguished for several days, but it wasn't just the light that was missing. The 3 keepers who were supposed to be tending it had vanished without a trace. No sign of struggle, no note left behind, no footprints leading anywhere. Only an eerie silence in a lighthouse that, for reasons unknown, stood completely abandoned. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse had been operating for just under 4 years when the disappearance occurred. Situated on a sheer cliff edge, the lighthouse was isolated, standing stark against the roaring North Sea. Its towering structure had been erected to protect passing ships from the sharp rocks below. But on that fateful December day, it seemed to have failed not just in its function, but in its very presence. The 3 keepers, Donald MacArthur, James Ducat, and Thomas Marshall, were nowhere to be found. At first, the authorities assumed it was some sort of tragic accident, perhaps linked to the storm. A search was launched, but there was no sign of the men anywhere. The keepers' personal belongings were still in their rooms, clothes neatly folded, food half-eaten, and warm fires still crackling in the hearths. A clock was stopped at precisely 8:45, as if time itself had frozen. The impression left was that of men who had simply vanished in the blink of an eye. What could have caused such a strange disappearance? Was it the storm that had swept the men away? Or was there something else at play on the desolate island? Some believe the answer lies in the very nature of the Flannan Isles themselves. The islands are known for their treacherous waters, harsh winds, and extreme isolation. Could it be that the men were caught in the fury of a storm, swept into the sea, or possibly trapped in a disaster at the lighthouse? It's possible that a violent wave struck the island during the storm, knocking the men into the sea without leaving any trace. However, no bodies were ever recovered, and no shipwrecks were discovered nearby. How could 3 men vanish without a single trace of their existence being left behind? The absence of any physical evidence from the sea only deepened the mystery. Others have turned to more speculative theories, suggesting that something far more sinister was at work. Some have proposed that the men were victims of foul play, perhaps a fight between the keepers, or even an external intruder who made his way onto the island. But again, the lack of any signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken windows, no forced entry, leaves this explanation wanting. The doors to the lighthouse were securely locked, the windows intact, and all of the keepers' personal effects remained undisturbed. The most enduring theory, however, is that the men were taken by something supernatural, something beyond the natural world. The Flannan Isles have long been steeped in local legend and myth, and the mystery of the lighthouse keeper's disappearance quickly took on a ghostly air. Some speculated that the men had been taken by a phantom force, perhaps the wrath of the sea itself, or the spirits of those who had perished in the waters before them. The island's isolation and its history of shipwrecks made it easy for some to imagine that the men had been claimed by some otherworldly presence, a curse that had haunted the area for centuries. Theories of a ghostly hand at work were not helped by a strange account that surfaced shortly after the disappearance. A lighthouse tender who had visited the island just days before the keepers vanished reported hearing eerie sounds coming from the lighthouse. According to the tender, the keepers were unusually quiet during his visit, and when he left, he felt an unsettling presence linger in the air. Could it be that the men had sensed something in the days leading up to their disappearance? Or was it simply the tension of isolation playing tricks on their minds? The human mind under such extreme conditions is known to create illusions and misinterpret sounds and events in ways that can seem deeply unsettling. As time passed, several theories continued to emerge. Some more grounded in reality, others more fantastical. A few people wondered if the men had been driven mad by the isolation, their minds unraveling in the desolate landscape of the Flannan Isles. The thought of prolonged isolation in a place so remote with no human contact for weeks is enough to drive anyone to the edge. Was it possible that the keepers simply snapped under the pressure? But this too seems unlikely. These were experienced men who had spent years at sea and understood the challenges of working in such harsh conditions. It seems implausible that they would all lose their minds at the same time and without any obvious sign of a breakdown. Another theory points to the possibility of an external explanation, the notion that the lighthouse had been sabotaged. Some have suggested that the keepers might have been deliberately targeted by criminals or other parties seeking to disrupt the lighthouse operation, but once again there is no clear evidence to support this. The doors were locked and nothing appeared to have been disturbed. Then there is the theory that the keepers were simply lost to the elements, taken by a wave or swept into a whirlpool that left no trace. While it remains a plausible explanation, it is hard to reconcile with the fact that no bodies were ever found. No wreckage, no debris, no indication that such an event had occurred. This leaves us with an unsettling thought. If the keepers were swept away, where did they go? Despite all these theories, the mystery of the Flannan Isles Keepers remains unsolved to this day. For over a century, it has continued to haunt the minds of those who hear the story. What truly happened on that cold December night? Did the keepers disappear into the grasp of the sea? Or was something far stranger at work on the desolate island? Was it simply an unfortunate accident? Or was it the work of something far more inexplicable? Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the mystery is how little we truly know. Despite numerous investigations, despite all the years of research, no one has ever been able to definitively explain the disappearance of the lighthouse keepers. The silence of the Flannan Isles seems to echo the unanswered questions that linger in the air. Unanswered and unresolved, what remains of the story is the lighthouse itself, standing empty and silent against the windswept cliffs, its beam never again shining over the sea. And as the years pass, the haunting question remains: what truly happened on the Flannan Isles in December 1900? And what, if anything, still lies hidden in the fog of that forgotten history? As the early morning mist settled over the waters off the coast of New York in 1850, the Seabird, a merchant ship, sailed silently toward the horizon. This vessel, like many of its kind, had a routine and familiar mission, transporting goods, sailing from port to port, braving the unpredictable waters of the Atlantic. The ship was no stranger to the sea, but in the summer of 1850, something happened that would transform the Seabird into part of one of the most baffling and unsettling maritime mysteries of the 19th century. The Seabird was due to return from its journey to the West Indies. Its destination was New York City, but the ship never arrived. On June 22, 1850, the vessel left Havana, Cuba, under the command of Captain John R. O'Brien. The ship carried a crew of 15 and was expected to make the 1,400-meter voyage back to New York in a matter of weeks. But by the time the months rolled on, no sign of the Seabird was found. No distress signals, no wreckage, no floating debris. The ship simply vanished as if it had been swallowed by the ocean itself. When the Seabird failed to arrive in New York by the expected date, concern began to grow. The ship had sailed into a storm during its journey. No one doubted that many ships had suffered under the wrath of the Atlantic in the days prior to its disappearance. So at first it was assumed that the Seabird had been caught in some catastrophe, perhaps a wreck, or perhaps it had been overtaken by a powerful storm. But as weeks turned into months and no trace of the ship was found, speculation began to rise. Had the ship simply sunk beneath the waves? Could the storm have been so violent that even the sturdy Seabird was no match for nature's power? Or was something more mysterious at play? The answers, as it turned out, would remain elusive. What makes the disappearance of the Seabird even more baffling is the fact that it wasn't just the ship that vanished. It was the very signposts of its existence. No wreckage was found. No lifeboats washed ashore. No bodies. No remnants of the ship's cargo or supplies. The disappearance was total. It seemed as though the Seabird and all of its crew had simply disappeared into thin air, as if they had been taken by some force that had no traceable origin. The lack of evidence was chilling. Ships that went down in storms typically left behind some kind of marker: splintered wood, broken masts, the remains of the cargo they were carrying. Even in cases where a ship sank without a trace, there would often be wreckage that could be tied back to the missing vessel. But with the Seabird, there was nothing, not a single piece of evidence to suggest what had happened to it. No wreck site, no signs of a battle, no signs of an accident. The ship had simply vanished, and no one knew where to look. In the years since the Seabird vanished, a number of theories have emerged, each attempting to explain what happened to the ship and its crew. Some have argued that the storm had been far more powerful than initially realized, that it was simply an accident, a tragedy in the open sea. There were reports of violent weather patterns during that time with torrential rains, strong winds, and waves crashing over the decks of passing ships. Could the seabird have been struck by such a wave that it sank without a trace? One theory, although widely discredited, posited that the ship was a victim of piracy. It was possible, some said, that the seabird had been intercepted by pirates who had ransacked the vessel and taken the crew hostage. But this explanation didn't hold water for long. No ransom demands were ever made, and no ships were reported missing in the vicinity of the seabird during the time of its disappearance. Pirates were often active in the Caribbean, but it seemed unlikely that they would have left no trace, especially if they had taken such a large vessel. Others speculated that the ship had been caught in an oceanic whirlpool or a tidal current so powerful that it dragged the seabird under, leaving no remnants behind. While whirlpools have indeed sunk ships in the past, such an event would be extraordinarily rare. The currents in the Atlantic Ocean are often powerful, but they tend to leave behind at least some trace of a ship's passage. Yet, nothing of the seabird was ever found. Could the ship and its crew have been caught in a rare and powerful phenomenon, one that erased all signs of their existence? Then there are the more fantastical theories, the ones that delve into the realms of the unknown. One of the most popular theories is the idea that the seabird fell victim to some kind of supernatural force, an entity or presence in the ocean that took the ship as it had taken so many others before it. The notion of ghost ships, ships that disappear or are doomed to roam the seas forever, has long captivated imaginations. Could it be that the seabird fell victim to a curse or supernatural phenomenon? Could the crew have met an untimely end at the hands of some force beyond their comprehension? An ancient spirit of the sea that had claimed its latest victims. Others have posited that the ship could have been taken by a rogue wave. Massive waves that can suddenly appear without warning and sink even the most well-equipped ships. Rogue waves are known to be rare and unpredictable, but they can be extraordinarily powerful. A wave could have struck the ship, sending it to the depths of the ocean without leaving a single trace behind. But this too seems implausible when you consider that no trace of the ship's wreckage or cargo has ever surfaced. Despite the fact that rogue waves are often followed by some form of debris, perhaps the most plausible theory is that the seabird simply fell victim to an undetected and catastrophic mechanical failure, such as an explosion or a failure of the ship's structural integrity, which left no sign of debris. The ship's cargo could have shifted in the storm, causing a breach in the hull. Or perhaps there was a hidden flaw in the ship's construction that became catastrophic in the rough seas. If this were the case, it could explain why no wreckage was found. After all, a ship that sank in an instant could leave very little behind. But none of these theories fully answer the questions that linger about the seabird's fate. Why was there no wreckage? Why did no one see the ship go down? Why was there no sign of the crew? Why, despite extensive searches, could nothing be found in the area? What was it about the seabird that made its disappearance so complete, so total? As the years have passed, the seabird has become a symbol of the unknown, of the mysteries that still lie just beneath the surface of the sea. It is a reminder of how little we truly understand about the forces of nature, and how even the most experienced sailors can disappear without a trace. And so as we ponder the fate of the seabird, we are left with more questions than answers. Was it simply an unfortunate accident? A ship caught in the fury of a storm? Or is there something more at play? Could the seabird have been the victim of something darker, something unexplained? Could the ocean itself hold secrets that we have yet to understand? Perhaps the answer lies hidden in the deep waters where the ship was last seen. Or perhaps it remains just beyond our reach, waiting to be discovered in the years to come. Until then, the disappearance of the seabird remains one of the many great maritime mysteries, unsolved, elusive, and forever haunting the waters it once sailed. In the dense mist-covered woods of Tennessee, near the banks of the Red River, a strange and unsettling story has haunted the region for more than 2 centuries. It is a tale of inexplicable events, chilling manifestations, and an entity that seemed to hold the power to terrorize an entire family. This is the story of the Bell Witch, one of the most well-documented and disturbing hauntings in American folklore. The year was 1817 when the Bell family, led by John Bell, moved to their homestead in Robertson County. Their land was lush, a prime piece of farmland in the heart of Tennessee's wilderness. At first, the Bell family lived a peaceful, relatively ordinary life, with little to suggest that their home would become the epicenter of one of the most infamous hauntings in history. But that all changed in the autumn of 1817. The family began to experience strange disturbances. It started with faint noises, what sounded like someone or something softly tapping on the walls of the house. Then came louder knocks, followed by the eerie sounds of dragging chains, rustling leaves, and a soft rhythmic tapping, as if invisible hands were knocking in a pattern. At first, the Bells thought these noises were merely the result of the natural sounds of the surrounding forest, or perhaps some curious animals. But as the incidents continued, the reality of something far more sinister began to take shape. Soon the sounds grew more disturbing, and the source of the disturbances began to take on a far more personal tone. The Bell family's daughter, Betsy, became the focus of the haunting. She reported being slapped, pinched, and struck by invisible forces. At times, the Bell family would hear the voice of a disembodied entity taunting them, speaking in strange, guttural tones, as if mocking their very existence. It wasn't long before the Bell family realized that they weren't alone in their home, that some unseen presence had taken up residence, and it was not inclined to leave. The entity's voice was later described by those who witnessed it as having a deep, grating quality, sometimes speaking in riddles, other times in a chillingly clear tone. Over time, the voice became more articulate and sinister, and it began to speak directly to the Bell family, addressing them by name and even revealing details about their lives that no one else could have known. The voice identified itself as Kate, an entity that claimed to be the spirit of a woman who had lived in the area long before the Bells. But its origins were far from clear. Was this an ancient spirit, a force from beyond the grave, or something else entirely? As the weeks and months passed, the haunting escalated. Strange phenomena began to occur around the Bell home. Objects would move without explanation. Furniture would shift position, and the air itself would grow thick with a sense of dread. The Bells were not the only ones affected. Neighbors and visitors who came to the house found themselves subjected to the same eerie occurrences. Some even reported being physically harmed by the invisible force, scratched, bruised, and terrorized by the entity's malevolent presence. The story of the Bell Witch spread rapidly throughout the region, and soon people from all over came to witness the haunting firsthand. A number of individuals, scholars, preachers, and local leaders attempted to investigate the phenomenon, but they too found themselves confronted with the inexplicable. The entity would speak to them in unnerving ways, sometimes answering questions in a way that defied logic, and sometimes mocking the very idea of rational inquiry. One of the most famous encounters took place with the renowned preacher James Johnston. When he visited the Bell household, the entity responded by speaking to him directly, ridiculing his faith, and even claiming that it would expose the hypocrisy of the clergy. As he attempted to exorcise the spirit, it responded by slapping him across the face, an act that left the preacher stunned and shaken. In time, it became clear that the Bell Witch was no ordinary haunting. It was not simply a manifestation of some troubled spirit, but something far more complex and disturbing. Some speculated that the Bell Witch was a poltergeist, a spirit capable of physical manipulation of objects and people. Others believed that it was a demonic entity sent to torment the family as a punishment for some unknown sin. Theories abounded, but none provided a clear or satisfying explanation for the strange and terrifying events that plagued the Bell family. As for Betsy, the entity's interactions with her grew increasingly violent. It is said that the Bell Witch had a particular obsession with the young girl, and over time, the entity's torment became more pronounced. Betsy experienced physical assaults, being hit, slapped, and pinched by the invisible force, and her behavior became erratic, almost as though she were under the control of some external force. Eventually, she became so frightened and worn down by the supernatural attacks that she became physically ill. In 1821, after years of relentless torment, Betsy Bell reportedly called off her engagement to a local suitor, a decision that some say was influenced by the Bell Witch's influence on her life. The most dramatic moment of the haunting came when John Bell, the patriarch of the family, began to suffer increasingly severe health problems. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and he was often heard to speak of a dark, oppressive presence surrounding him. In what was described as a final act of malevolent energy, John Bell fell gravely ill, and soon after he died. According to reports from the time, The Bell Witch claimed responsibility for his death, announcing that it had poisoned him. While modern scholars are skeptical of this claim, it remains one of the most enduring aspects of the legend. In the wake of John Bell's death, the haunting reportedly began to fade. The manifestations became less frequent, and the Bell family eventually left their home. But the legend of the Bell Witch did not end with their departure. Over the years, the story has only grown more enigmatic. Some claim that the Bell Witch still haunts the area to this day, while others believe that its presence was merely a figment of collective hysteria. But even now, visitors to the Bell Witch Cave, located near the Bell family's original homestead, report experiencing strange sensations, cold spots, whispering voices, and an unsettling feeling of being watched. The Bell Witch haunting continues to captivate the imagination, as no one has ever been able to provide a definitive explanation for the events that unfolded at the Bell family's farm. Was it a genuine supernatural phenomenon? Or was it a case of mass hysteria amplified by the fear and superstition of the time? Was it the work of a malevolent spirit or something far darker, perhaps a manifestation of the troubled minds of those involved? The legend of the Bell Witch stands as one of the most mysterious and terrifying hauntings in American history. The unanswered questions that linger are enough to stir curiosity and unease. What was the true nature of the force that haunted the Bell family for so long? And could the Bell Witch still be out there waiting for its next victim? Perhaps the greatest mystery of all is the one that remains. Some forces, it seems, are beyond explanation, and the Bell Witch may still be one of them. An enigma locked away in the fog of history, as the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean stretched out before them. Jean-François de Galaup stood at the helm of the Astrolabe, one of two ships at the forefront of a grand scientific expedition in 1788. With the winds of history at his back, Lapérouse had embarked on a voyage that was as much about exploration as it was about diplomacy, science, and discovery. His mission was one of grandeur, meant to chart unknown territories, establish alliances, and add to the expanding knowledge of the world. The journey began in 1785 when Lapérouse, a distinguished naval officer of France, was appointed to lead an expedition to the Pacific and beyond. He sailed under the palaces of King Louis XVI with the aim of exploring the lands of the Pacific Ocean, mapping the western coast of North America, and conducting vital scientific studies in a region that had up until then remained largely beyond the reach of European exploration. His ships, the Astrolabe and the Boussole, were stocked with scientists, choreographers, and naturalists, all eager to unlock the mysteries of the farthest reaches of the globe. The expedition was poised to become one of the most significant of its kind, a symbol of French ambition and Enlightenment ideals. But it would end not with acclaim or recognition, but with silence. The disappearance of Jean-François de Galaup de Lapérouse and his entire crew remains one of history's greatest maritime mysteries. In early 1788, Lapérouse's expedition had already made significant strides in its exploration of the Pacific. Having visited Australia and the Salem Islands, the Astrolabe and buses continued to chart unknown waters, gradually making their way toward the coast of New Caledonia. They were expected to continue their journey to the Philippines, then on to China before returning to France. But something went horribly wrong during the latter part of the voyage, something that no one could have predicted. By 1789, the two ships had vanished from the annals of history. The Astrolabe and Boussole never returned to France, and for years, no word reached Europe of Lapérouse's fate. In the absence of communication, rumors began to spread. Had the ships been lost to a storm? Was there an attack from local tribes? Could they have been swept away by some unforeseen disaster? With no clues and no bodies, the disappearance of the expedition became an enigma that would linger for decades. It wasn't until 1826, nearly 40 years later, that the first trace of the expedition was discovered. British navigator Peter Dillon stumbled upon an unexpected lead. While traveling through the Solomon Islands, Dillon learned of an eerie tale among the indigenous inhabitants. The locals spoke of two French ships that had come ashore many years earlier, only to meet a gruesome fate. The survivors, they claimed, had been killed, and the wreckage of the ships had been lost beneath the waves. Dillon's discovery reignited interest in Lapérouse's disappearance. A subsequent search expedition found evidence that the Astrolabe and Boussole had indeed met their untimely end in the Solomon Islands. Wreckage from the ships was recovered, and more fragments of the mystery began to take shape. It was determined that Lapérouse and his crew had likely been shipwrecked on the coast of Vanikoro, a remote island in the Pacific. But what happened next? How did the expedition fall so far from its intended course? What had led to its demise? Theories surrounding the fate of Lapérouse and his men remain varied, and many aspects of the story continue to fuel speculation. One of the most widely accepted explanations is that a series of navigational errors, coupled with the dangers of the uncharted waters around Vanikoro, contributed to the wrecking of the two ships. The region's waters were notoriously treacherous, with sharp coral reefs and powerful currents, and it is possible that the two ships became stranded or damaged beyond repair. But what led to the crew's eventual demise, and why was no distress signal ever sent? Other theories delve deeper into the human side of the story, suggesting that perhaps the crew of the Astrolabe and Busaus were caught in a violent clash with the indigenous people of Vanikoro. The natives, having no experience with outsiders, may have seen the French sailors as threats, leading to an altercation that resulted in the death of the crew. But there is little evidence to support this, as subsequent contact with the island's inhabitants has not yielded any concrete explanations of violent interaction. Why then would the expedition's communications cease so abruptly? Could it be that the entire mission was doomed by something beyond natural or human causes? Some have proposed more fantastical theories, including the possibility of a supernatural intervention. Did Lapérouse and his men stumble upon something they were not meant to find? Perhaps an ancient and forgotten secret buried on the island? Or was it possible that the two ships were victims of some strange unknown force in the Pacific, one that led them to their doom? Another possibility that has been suggested is that the expedition fell prey to piracy, although this is an unlikely explanation given the location and the nature of Lapérouse's mission. The idea that the ships could have been intercepted by pirates seeking to plunder the valuable goods on board has been considered. However, there is no record of such an event, and the silence that surrounded Lapérouse's disappearance would make this scenario even more unlikely. But one theory that lingers more firmly is the simple but chilling conclusion that the ships encountered a catastrophic failure of navigation and were then marooned on a distant shore. Perhaps with no way of communicating with the outside world, the men died from exposure, disease, or lack of provisions. And yet, this scenario leaves us with one question. Why, if the crew had perished, did no survivors or bodies ever come forward? Why were there no signs left behind to show how Lapérouse's voyage ended? Despite the efforts to piece together the fragmented pieces of Lapérouse's fate, the mystery of his disappearance endures. The remains of the Astrolabe and Busaus were only found after decades of searching, and many details of the wreck have remained elusive, leaving us to wonder what truly happened to Jean-François de Galaup and his men. Was their disappearance the result of a simple navigational error? Or were there deeper, more enigmatic forces at work? As we reflect on the strange disappearance of one of the 18th century's most promising explorers, we are left with more questions than answers. What secrets are hidden in the deep waters of the Pacific? And will we ever truly understand the full story of what happened to the Astrolabe and Busaus? Perhaps some mysteries, like Lapérouse's final voyage, are destined to remain unsolved, locked forever in the vast, uncharted expanse of the sea. In the bustling heart of 19th century New York City, a seemingly impossible story made its way into the public consciousness, sparking debates that would ripple through society and capture the imagination of thousands. On August 25, 1835, the Sun newspaper, then a relatively obscure publication, ran an article that would shake the very foundation of what the public believed to be true about the moon, the stars, and the universe itself. The title of the story, innocuously simple, read, "Great Astronomical Discoveries Lately Made by Sir John Herschel," but what followed would be anything but ordinary. The article chronicled what appeared to be the groundbreaking discoveries of Sir John Herschel, one of the most renowned astronomers of the time, who allegedly made a series of astounding observations while stationed in South Africa. These discoveries, detailed in a series of 6 articles, described a strange and bizarre new world on the surface of the moon. The inhabitants of this lunar world were not what anyone might have expected. Instead of barren landscapes and cold, uninhabited plains, the moon was portrayed as a thriving, vibrant place, home to winged creatures, bat-like humanoids, and even entire forests of trees that were as alive as the ones on Earth. The most striking of all the revelations, however, was that the moon's surface was teeming with intelligent life. These moon-dwelling beings were described as having the ability to communicate, live in cities, and even engage in complex social behaviors, including building structures and using tools. The most extraordinary claim, perhaps, was the presence of large bipedal creatures that resembled a hybrid between a bat and a human. Their society was described as advanced and harmonious with scientists, scholars, and rulers, a far cry from the lifeless rock that most had imagined when gazing up at the moon. But there was something peculiar about the way these stories were presented. The Sun did not claim that these discoveries were based on any personal speculation or the musings of an overzealous astronomer. Instead, it was framed as a report of real, verified observations. It was as though the discovery of a new world had been delivered directly into the hands of the public. The moon was no longer a cold, distant celestial body. It was a vibrant, teeming world just waiting to be explored. What happened next was equally astonishing. The public, captivated by the sensational nature of the article, eagerly devoured each new installment. The Sun sold more copies than ever before, and the moon, long a subject of scientific curiosity and poetry, was suddenly thrust into the realm of popular culture as never before. People from all walks of life read about the extraordinary lunar creatures, debated the implications of this new discovery, and even began to wonder if they too might one day travel to the moon. But as the excitement built, so did a sense of skepticism. As the details of the discoveries grew ever more fantastical, some began to ask whether these revelations could really be true. How could such extraordinary findings be hidden for so long? Where were the records of Herschel's observations? Why had no one else in the scientific community heard of these remarkable claims? What began as a story of astronomical wonder soon began to show signs of something more elusive. An elaborate ruse, a carefully crafted deception designed to capture the public's imagination, and perhaps something more. The Sun's editor, Richard Adams Lockitch, had cleverly woven a narrative that seemed so plausible, so deeply rooted in the credibility of science that it took several weeks for the truth to be revealed. It was then that the public learned that the entire story was a hoax. There had been no real discoveries by Herschel. The tales of lunar civilizations, of bat-winged creatures, and fantastical landscapes were purely fictional. They were the work of a skilled writer, Locke himself, who had cleverly combined current astronomical knowledge with elements of fantasy to craft an imaginative and wildly entertaining tale. Despite the eventual revelation, the so-called Great Moon Hoax endured in the public imagination. Some questioned the motives behind the deception. Was it simply an elaborate stunt to increase the Sun's circulation? Or was there a deeper message hidden within the pages of those articles? The line between truth and fiction had blurred so completely that many people continued to believe the fantastical lunar discoveries even after the hoax was exposed. After all, what better way to capture the fascination of an entire population than with a story so captivating that it defied the very limits of what they thought was possible? As the years passed, the story of the Great Moon Hoax began to fade into obscurity. Yet, its legacy endures in many ways, shaping our understanding of how stories are told, how myths can be born, and how the boundaries between fact and fiction can become dangerously intertwined. The hoax didn't just fool the public of the 19th century. It was a precursor to the many deceptions and viral myths that would define the modern age long before the internet, fake news, or the concept of alternative facts. The motivations behind the Great Moon Hoax remain a subject of debate. Some believe that Lockitch and the Sun had no ulterior purpose beyond sensationalism, seeking to boost sales by feeding the public's insatiable curiosity about the unknown. Others suggest that Lockitch's creation of the hoax was more than just a financial tactic. It was an experiment in the power of storytelling, a commentary on the nature of truth, and an exploration of how easily the public could be swayed by an authoritative source. Did Loach intend to mock the gullibility of the masses, or was he simply testing the limits of what could be achieved with the written word? The hoax was also indicative of the larger context of the 19th century, a time when the wonders of science and exploration were being thrust into the public eye at a dizzying pace. The concept of a scientific revolution, the rise of astronomy, and the quest for knowledge about the stars and the planets had captured the imagination of countless people. In this environment, the idea of discovering new worlds, even on the moon, felt more tantalizing than ever. And yet, By presenting the fantastic as fact, the Sun had demonstrated just how easily the human mind can be drawn into the allure of the unknown, how readily people will suspend disbelief for the sake of a good story. In the end, the Great Moon Hoax remains a fascinating glimpse into the intersection of science, myth, and public perception. Was it an innocent prank, a satire of the public's fascination with discovery, or did it reflect a deeper, more unsettling truth about how far the media and those in positions of authority can push the boundaries of what is believed to be real? Perhaps the true mystery lies in the fact that even today some still find themselves captivated by the tale of a moon filled with strange creatures, forgotten cities, and impossible landscapes. The Great Moon Hoax continues to haunt our cultural memory, a reminder that in a world driven by stories, sometimes the line between reality and fiction is far thinner than we care to admit. In the quiet town of Batavia, New York, in the early months of 1826, the air was thick with tension, secrecy, and fear. It was a time when the United States was still in its early stages, a young nation struggling with its identity, with the moral and political foundations of its society in flux. Against this backdrop, the disappearance of one man would set off a chain of events that would reverberate far beyond the confines of this small town, one of the most mysterious and contentious cases of murder and cover-up in American history. William Morgan, a man who had arrived in Batavia from the nearby town of Lockport, seemed like an ordinary person, someone who could easily blend into the fabric of 19th century American life. But Morgan was no ordinary man. His name would become infamous not just because of his disappearance, but because of what he stood for: the pursuit of truth, the questioning of power, and the potentially deadly consequences of exposing secrets. Morgan had been a part of the Freemason Society, one of the many secretive fraternal organizations that thrived in the 19th century. Freemasonry, with its arcane rituals and elaborate oaths, had long captured the imagination and suspicion of the public. The Masons, as they were often called, were a society that blended brotherhood, charity, and mystery. But it was also an organization that held great power. Its members occupy influential positions in society, business, and politics. As Morgan became more deeply involved in the society, something began to trouble him. He had been initiated into the Masonic Lodge and had been exposed to the organization's rituals. But soon he grew uneasy with what he perceived as a lack of transparency within the group, particularly the secrecy surrounding the initiation rituals, which to him seemed to be at odds with the ideals of openness and honesty that were the foundation of the young American Republic. He became increasingly disillusioned and began questioning Mason's motives. Morgan began to speak out publicly, even offering to reveal the Masonic rituals and secrets to the world. He saw himself as a truth-teller, someone whose revelations would expose the hidden imaginations of an organization that held too much influence over American society. His decision to publish a book detailing the secrets of the Freemasons seemed to be an act of defiance, one that would bring down the powerful group once and for all. But the Freemasons had their own methods of dealing with perceived threats. In the months following Morgan's public announcements, strange things began to happen. Morgan was harassed, threatened, and even arrested on flimsy charges, including claims that he had stolen property. His attempts to publish his book were obstructed, and he found himself becoming an increasingly marginalized figure. But perhaps the most chilling development of all was the growing suspicion that Morgan had made a powerful enemy, one that would stop at nothing to silence him. On the evening of September 11, 1826, William Morgan disappeared without a trace. It is a disappearance that remains shrouded in mystery, and one that still raises more questions than answers. What happened to Morgan that night? Did he simply vanish into the night, leaving no sign of where he went? Or was he the victim of foul play? Many believe that Morgan was murdered by a group of Freemasons who saw his book as a direct threat to their secrecy and influence. Morgan's public declaration of his intention to expose the inner workings of the Masons had made him a target. In the months leading up to his disappearance, there were rumors that the Masons were preparing to take action against him. Rumors that were later confirmed when witnesses claimed to have seen Morgan being forcibly taken from his home. Some reports even suggested that he had been locked in a room, held against his will, and eventually murdered by his captors. But what happened to Morgan's body? Despite an extensive search by the authorities, no physical evidence of his murder was ever found. No corpse was recovered, The Freemasons, whose members included many of Batavia's most prominent citizens, denied any involvement in the disappearance, and the authorities, despite some initial investigation, seemed unwilling to pursue the case with the fervor it required. As the weeks turned into months, suspicions grew and the case took on a life of its own. Speculation ran rampant, with some even suggesting that Morgan's body had been buried in a secret Masonic cemetery, while others claimed that he had been thrown into the Niagara River. Still others believed that Morgan had been smuggled away to a distant land far from the reach of the law to live out his days in obscurity. However, one of the most haunting aspects of the mystery was the belief among some that Morgan's disappearance had been part of a much larger conspiracy, one that involved not just the Freemasons, but powerful figures in the state and national government. These theories posited that Morgan had been silenced because he was about to expose something far greater than the secrets of a fraternal organization, something that threatened the very fabric of American society. Some speculated that Morgan's murder was an act of political repression, one that revealed the extent to which the Freemasons and their allies would go to protect their influence. The public outcry surrounding Morgan's disappearance became so intense that it eventually led to the formation of anti-Masonic political movements. The case fueled suspicion and distrust of the Masons, particularly among the growing wave of populist movements in America, who saw the Freemasons as part of a larger, more insidious power structure. Morgan's disappearance and the subsequent conspiracy theories surrounding his death even led to the formation of political parties that sought to challenge the Masonic influence on American life. For years, the story of his murder would remain a rallying cry for those who believed in exposing corruption and secrecy. Yet, the mystery of William Morgan's disappearance remains unsolved to this day. Theories abound, but no definitive answers have ever emerged. Did Morgan truly meet a violent end at the hands of the Freemasons? Or did he somehow escape and live out the rest of his life in secrecy? Was his disappearance the result of a shadowy conspiracy? Or was it the tragic culmination of a man's obsessive desire to expose the truth no matter the cost? The fact that William Morgan's fate remains uncertain, his body never found, his killers never brought to justice, only adds to the dark allure of this chilling chapter in American history. What secrets did Morgan uncover that were so dangerous? And what lengths did those in power go to in order to keep those secrets buried? The unanswered questions linger, haunting the pages of history, reminding us that some mysteries are never fully revealed, no matter how much we wish to uncover the truth. It is the year 1788, and the streets of London are alive with the bustle of commerce, the hum of everyday life, and perhaps something more sinister lurking beneath the surface. The city, with its cobblestone streets, fog-filled nights, and the ever-present clamor of life, was both the heart of an empire and a breeding ground for fears, rumors, and whispers. It was within this backdrop that one of the most perplexing and terrifying mysteries of late 18th century London would unfold: the attacks by the so-called London Monster. Imagine, if you will, the narrow, dimly lit alleys of the city, where the gas lamps cast long, flickering shadows on the brick buildings. The air is thick, damp, and heavy with the smells of industry, sweat, and the inevitable sting of coal smoke. It is a world in which the line between safety and danger seems all too easily blurred. And then in this world, a series of brutal, inexplicable attacks on unsuspecting women would set the city on edge and send shockwaves of fear through its streets. The first known attack occurred in 1788, when a woman named Anne Porter was suddenly assaulted by a man who, in an inexplicable act of violence, slashed at her with a blade hidden beneath his coat. What made the attack all the more disturbing was the absence of any obvious motive. There was no robbery, no sexual assault, just an unprovoked attack that left Anne Porter deeply scarred, both physically and psychologically. Over the course of the next 2 years, similar attacks occurred throughout London, each one more terrifying than the last. The victims, all women, were slashed, scratched, and wounded, often in public spaces, on busy streets, in broad daylight, and near crowded marketplaces. Some were even disfigured in ways that defied easy explanation, their injuries suggesting a level of malice that seemed almost otherworldly. What made these attacks all the more puzzling was the identity of the perpetrator, or rather the lack of it. The London Monster, as the press would come to call him, was a phantom, a shadow that lurked just beyond the reach of the authorities. No one knew who he was, or even what he truly looked like. Victims offered conflicting descriptions of their assailant. Some spoke of a man with a large nose, others of a man with a peculiar gait, still others of a figure who seemed to vanish into the crowds before anyone could properly identify him. Despite the attempts of law enforcement to capture the attacker, the London monster continued to evade capture, seemingly taunting the city with each new attack. Rumors began to spread. Was this a single man acting alone, or was there a group of attackers? Was this a case of madness, or was there a more sinister force at play? Theories about the monster's identity ran rampant, ranging from the plausible to the downright fantastical. Some claimed the monster was a disgruntled lover seeking revenge. Others suggested he was an individual suffering from a form of mental illness. A more fringe theory emerged that the attacks were part of some dark ritual, an effort to invoke fear or to create chaos in an already volatile society. This speculation only fed into the growing anxiety and hysteria that gripped London's citizens as the monster seemed to attack with impunity, leaving behind only terror in his wake. The press, ever eager to sensationalize such a bizarre case, played a central role in shaping public perception. The newspapers were filled with lurid accounts of the attacks, each one more grotesque than the last. The public's imagination was fired by these sensational stories, and the once thriving city was now consumed by paranoia and dread. Women especially began to live in fear, cautious of even the most mundane of encounters in the streets, wary of any man who might seem out of place. In response to the growing panic, the authorities launched a series of investigations, hoping to bring the unknown assailant to justice. But despite their best efforts, the case remained baffling. Witnesses were too frightened to speak up, or their accounts were inconsistent. Some women who had been attacked despite their injuries were reluctant to testify, perhaps fearing further retribution, and so the case stalled. Then in 1790, the London monster's reign of terror seemed to come to an abrupt end. The attacks stopped as mysteriously as they had begun, leaving Londoners to wonder whether the monster had simply grown bored, moved on to another city, or most disturbingly, was preparing for his next wave of violence. No one knew for certain, and the sense of unresolved tension in the city only deepened. In the aftermath, the mystery of the London monster seemed destined to become one of history's many forgotten enigmas. Yet, even today, scholars, historians, and amateur detectives continue to revisit the case, still haunted by the unanswered questions surrounding the identity of the assailant and the nature of the attacks. Was the London monster a single deranged individual? Or were the attacks the work of multiple perpetrators? And what could possibly explain the sudden cessation of the attacks? Has the monster been caught? Had he simply grown bored of his sadistic game? What makes the case of the London monster particularly eerie is the fact that despite the relentless investigations, no definitive answers have ever emerged. There were no witnesses who could clearly identify the attacker. The crimes were never conclusively solved, and the true motives of the London monster remained shrouded in mystery. Even the identity of the man or men behind the attacks was never conclusively revealed. Was the assailant an isolated madman, a rogue figure outside the boundaries of society's understanding? Or was this a reflection of some deeper societal ill? An unspoken manifestation of the fear and unease that gripped the populace during a time of social unrest. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this mystery is its unresolved nature. The London monster story was not one of a simple criminal act, but rather a reflection of the darker undercurrents that ran beneath the surface of London society. It's easy to wonder, was the monster just a figure of terror? Or was he something more? A symbol of something deeper? A manifestation of the collective fears that still haunt us today? What then does the mystery of the London monster reveal about our own understanding of fear, the unknown, and the things that lurk in the shadows of history? Why does this haunting case still captivate our imagination, even 2 centuries after it began? The answers may lie hidden in the foggy streets of London, in the distant echoes of a time long past, and perhaps, just perhaps, the true nature of the London monster will remain a mystery, forever woven into the fabric of the city's history. What could the London monster's legacy reveal about us, and how much do we truly know about the nature of fear itself? The mystery remains unsolved, a chilling reminder that some questions may never find their answers, and some shadows will always remain will. The dense tropical jungles of the Philippines have always been a place of mystery, even in the 1800s. As explorers and colonizers ventured deeper into its remote corners, much of its land remained untouched, veiled in layers of secrecy and myth. Here, the jungle was more than just a physical landscape. It was a realm where stories of the supernatural flourished, where strange creatures were said to roam, and where the line between reality and folklore seemed to blur. It was in this world that the Berbalang, a mysterious entity, would make its first appearance, a phenomenon that remains unexplained to this very day. Picture, if you will, the Philippine island of Mindanao shrouded in the heavy heat of the midday sun. Towering trees, their leaves lush and dark, form a near impenetrable canopy above. The air smells of damp earth and decaying vegetation, and the dense underbrush is alive with the distant sounds of wildlife. Creatures moving in the shadows, unseen but unmistakably present. It is within this natural maze that the stories of the Berbalang began to surface, often in hushed tones among the locals, but soon attracting the attention of outsiders. The first recorded sightings of these strange creatures came in the early 1800s, a time when the Philippines was under Spanish colonial rule. Foreigners, particularly those from the West, had started to report unusual events while exploring the island's remote regions. Their accounts, though inconsistent, all spoke of something eerie and unsettling. Humanoid figures, often described as having the appearance of large skeletal beings with glowing eyes and a disturbing tendency to attack from the air. These creatures, known as Berbalang or Berbalang, were said to swoop down from the trees or from the sky itself, descending upon their victims with terrifying speed. The Berbalang was described in many ways, but the most consistent accounts painted a picture of a creature that was half human, half animal, with a distinct predilection for stalking the living. In some versions of the story, the creatures were said to be shapeshifters, able to transform into flying beasts or hide among the shadows of the jungle. In other tales, they were supernatural beings with an insatiable hunger for human flesh. Some versions even went so far as to claim that the Berbalang could consume the souls of the dead, rising up from their graves to continue feeding on the living. What made these reports particularly disturbing, however, was the way in which the Berbalang's victims were described. Those who came into contact with the creatures were said to suffer a slow, agonizing death. Some reported being found with their bodies mutilated, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Others claimed that they had been driven mad by the fear of the Berbalang's presence, often refusing to speak of what they had witnessed. Survivors, if any were found, spoke of a feeling of dread that overtook them in the moments before the attack, a sense that something was watching them, waiting to strike. But the reports were not just confined to a few isolated incidents. As the 19th century progressed, more and more people, both locals and foreigners alike, began to report similar sightings. The stories of the Berbalang began to spread beyond the jungles of Mindanao, reaching the ears of sailors, missionaries, and explorers who passed through the region. Some dismissed the reports as mere superstition, the product of overactive imaginations or the result of local folklore taking root in the minds of outsiders. Others, however, were not so quick to dismiss the phenomenon. As the phenomenon gained attention, some began to speculate on what the Berbalang could actually be. Was it a species of animal unknown to Western science? Perhaps a large predatory bird with bizarre and frightening characteristics? Or was it something more enigmatic? A form of spiritual or supernatural entity that had eluded explanation for centuries? Some of the more rational explanations suggested that the creatures described in the reports were merely large birds such as eagles or vultures whose size and appearance could easily be misinterpreted by those unfamiliar with the local wildlife. This theory, however, did little to account for the peculiar behaviors attributed to the Berbalang, such as its ability to attack at will, its supposed ability to change shape, and its relentless pursuit of its victims. Another theory proposed that the Berbalang were not creatures at all, but rather a form of mass hysteria. In an era where colonialism, war, and disease ravaged the population, could the fear of the unknown have triggered these strange reports? Was it possible that people suffering from the trauma of living in such a hostile environment had created a shared mythology to explain the inexplicable? The Berbalang could be a manifestation of collective fear, a way to personify the dangers that lurked within the jungle and the minds of the people who lived on the fringes of civilization. And yet, for all the possible explanations, there were still elements of the Berbalang phenomenon that defied easy categorization. The most compelling aspect of the mystery was the fact that it was not confined to any one group of people. It wasn't just foreigners who encountered the creatures, but also locals who had lived in the jungles of Mindanao for generations. These were not individuals prone to superstition. They were seasoned inhabitants who had grown accustomed to the dangers of the land. And yet, their encounters with the Berbalang were no less terrifying, with many of them reporting the same disturbing characteristics as the foreign explorers. One particularly unsettling account written by a Spanish missionary in the 1800s describes a group of villagers who were said to have been attacked by the Berbalang while traveling through the jungle. The missionary wrote that the survivors of the attack claimed that the creatures had come from the trees, swooping down upon them with such speed and precision that they had no time to react. The villagers described the creatures as having an unnaturally long wingspan and glowing red eyes, and they spoke of hearing strange, guttural sounds in the air as the creatures circled above them. The missionary himself, though initially skeptical, was said to have been so disturbed by the survivors' accounts that he eventually abandoned his mission in the area. He left the island unable to explain what he had heard, and the story of the Berbalang faded from his records, leaving behind only a chilling reminder of something unsolved. In the years since, the mystery of the Berbalang has not faded. Scholars and enthusiasts alike have continued to investigate the phenomenon, but the true nature of the creatures, if they ever existed at all, remains shrouded in uncertainty. Was the Berbalang merely a myth created to explain the unexplained, or was it a genuine phenomenon, a glimpse into a hidden corner of the natural or supernatural world that we still do not fully understand? What then are we to make of the Berbalang? The accounts, though fragmented and inconsistent, offer a compelling glimpse into a world where the line between the natural and the supernatural is difficult to discern. Are they merely the product of superstition? Or is there something more to the phenomenon, something we have yet to uncover? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between myth and reality, a story not yet fully told, waiting for the right time to be understood. And as we look back on the reports of the Berbalang, we can't help but wonder what other mysteries lost to time might still be waiting to be uncovered in the depths of the world's darkest corners. The Berbalang may be a riddle that remains unsolved, but in the realm of mystery, sometimes the very act of wondering is the key to discovering the truth. London, 1837. The fog rolled thickly over the cobblestone streets, curling in serpentine patterns as it drifted through the narrow alleys and across the gaslit lanes of the city. The night was heavy with mystery, and the streets, though filled with the murmur of late-night travelers, always seemed to have a certain unease hanging in the air. This was a city of contradiction, full of life, yet laced with dark secrets. It was during these hours when the city's heartbeat seemed to slow that one of its most disturbing legends began to take shape. Spring-heeled Jack, an elusive, shadowy figure, first emerged in the public consciousness around this time, and the sightings of this mysterious entity would continue to haunt London for decades. Descriptions of Spring-heeled Jack varied, but there were consistent elements that made his appearances all the more terrifying. He was said to possess extraordinary physical abilities, able to leap high into the air, his jumps defying all natural explanation. Some reports even claimed he could be bound over rooftops, disappearing into the night with an agility no human could replicate. But what made these reports even more chilling were the details surrounding his encounters. Witnesses spoke of his appearance, a tall, thin figure clad in tight-fitting clothing, often described as having an eerie, almost otherworldly appearance. His face was said to be terrifying, sometimes glowing with an unnatural light with eyes that gleamed like fire. His fingers were said to be claw-like, and in some versions of the story, he was rumored to have a grin that was as unnerving as his other features. Some accounts went so far as to say that his skin was pale and rubbery, like something that was not quite human. In the earliest reports, Spring-heeled Jack was depicted as a predator, often attacking young women walking alone at night. The details of these attacks were unsettling. The women were said to have been assaulted by a figure who would suddenly leap from the shadows, scratching or clawing at them before disappearing into the fog as quickly as he had arrived. A chilling consistency in the accounts was that his victims were often left stunned or incapacitated by the terror of their encounter. But few were ever seriously harmed. Yet, the psychological toll on those who encountered him was undeniable. One of the earliest and most famous accounts came in 1837 when a young woman named Mary Stevens was walking in Clapham Common. She reported that she was suddenly approached by a man who leapt out from the shadows. In an instant, he attacked, grabbing her, clawing at her clothes and skin before making a swift escape, leaping away with surprising agility. The attack was so sudden, so shocking that she was left in a state of hysteria. When police began to investigate, they found that this was not the first such incident. Other young women had reported similar attacks, though none could offer any physical evidence of the assailant. But what made Spring-Heeled Jack's appearances even more bizarre were the descriptions of his mannerisms. He was no mere figure of terror. He was also a trickster, even playful at times. One witness claimed that Jack had grinned as he leapt over a hedge, disappearing into the mist. Another reported that he had laughed, an unsettling, high-pitched cackle as he disappeared into the shadows. These details painted a picture of a figure who was not simply an attacker, but something more sinister and unsettling, something that toyed with its victims before slipping away into the darkness. As the reports continued, many theories emerged to explain the phenomenon. Some believed Spring-Heeled Jack was simply a masked man, someone using the cloak of darkness to carry out a series of attacks. A few suspected he was a member of the elite, or some form of aristocratic prankster playing on the fears of the common people for his own amusement. The police even pursued a number of suspects, including prominent individuals and known criminals. But none of these theories provided a satisfying explanation. One suggestion was that Spring-Heeled Jack might be a supernatural figure, some form of demon or phantom from the depths of folklore. His ability to leap great distances, his glowing eyes, and his ability to appear and disappear with such speed seemed to suggest something beyond human capabilities. Some believed he might have been a creature from the realm of nightmares, an entity summoned from the depths of the human subconscious, manifesting itself in the very heart of London's darkest streets. In the 1840s and 1850s, sightings of Spring-Heeled Jack began to spread beyond London, reaching other parts of the United Kingdom. It wasn't just in the shadowy lanes of the capital that people were encountering the strange figure. Reports began to trickle in from rural towns and villages, places where one would expect such tales to be even more fantastical. And yet the stories remained consistent, each one describing the same eerie figure who could leap great distances, vanishing before anyone could catch a clear glimpse of him. As the years wore on, the legend of Spring-Heeled Jack grew. His attacks, though rare, continued to generate fear and fascination in equal measure. Some suggested that he was a man driven by madness, a being who found pleasure in terrorizing the most vulnerable members of society. Others speculated that he might have been a fugitive from justice, using his strange abilities to elude capture. But perhaps the most curious explanation was the suggestion that he was some kind of early industrial experiment gone wrong. The period in which Spring-Heeled Jack appeared was one of great social and technological upheaval, with advancements in machinery and science transforming the world. Could it be that this strange figure was the result of a failed experiment, an attempt to create something extraordinary that went awry? Despite the many theories and speculations, no one could ever confirm the true identity of Spring-Heeled Jack. There were some who believed the sightings were part of a hoax, perhaps a series of elaborate practical jokes meant to generate fear and excitement among the public. Yet, as the years passed, the figure of Spring-Heeled Jack became woven into the very fabric of London's folklore. A tale that haunted the city long after the reports of his sightings had faded away. The last known report of Spring-Heeled Jack came in the 1870s, though sightings of similar figures often described in the same terms continued well into the 20th century. By the time the 20th century arrived, the tale of Spring-Heeled Jack had become a part of London's enduring legacy of mystery, alongside such legends as Jack the Ripper and the Phantom of the Opera. Whether or not Spring-Heeled Jack was a real figure or simply a product of the collective imagination is still up for debate. Could Spring-Heeled Jack have been a real man, a criminal with extraordinary abilities? Or was he the creation of a fearful society, a manifestation of anxiety and superstition? Perhaps, like many mysteries from the past, we will never know the full truth, yet the eerie accounts of his appearances continue to captivate and haunt us, a reminder of how, in the darkest corners of history, some questions remain unresolved. Was Spring Jack a man or something far darker? As the fog rolls in and the gas lamps flicker, one can't help but wonder, are there still those who walk the streets, hidden in the shadows, waiting to leap into the night? In the late 19th century, a quiet town in the Canadian province of Nova Scotia became the setting for one of the most perplexing and eerie supernatural events ever recorded. Amherst, a small town nestled along the Bay of Fundy, was known for its peaceful streets and tight-knit community. However, the calm of this otherwise tranquil place would soon be shattered by an event that would defy logical explanation. An event that would come to be known as the Great Amherst Mystery. It was in 1878 when the first strange occurrences began to disturb the quiet life of the Mackey family, who lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town. At first, it was subtle. A few unexplained noises, objects mysteriously displaced, and a faint, unshakable sense of unease in the air. But as the days passed, the disturbances grew more violent and more inexplicable. Furniture was thrown across rooms with no human hand to guide it. Loud noises filled the night air. The sounds of knocking, scratching, and whispering voices, all seeming to emanate from nowhere. The disturbances were particularly centered around the youngest member of the family, 18-year-old Esther Cox. Esther had been an ordinary young woman before this unsettling phenomenon began. However, as the unexplained events escalated, she seemed to become the focal point of the haunting. It wasn't long before the haunting was no longer just about mysterious noises or things being moved. Now the family witnessed objects flying across the room with no apparent cause. The walls seemed to pulse with strange energy, and Esther herself became the victim of violent physical assaults, as if invisible hands were striking her, pinning her down, or shaking her. But what made the Great Amherst Mystery particularly chilling was that these disturbances were not just confined to one household. Neighbors, friends, and even local authorities soon found themselves drawn into the strange events. Reports from witnesses describe objects flying through the air, seemingly guided by an unseen force. One witness claimed to see Esther's bed levitate, and another reported seeing large stones lift from the ground and move across the room without any physical intervention. The local constable, skeptical of the early reports, initially dismissed the events as a result of local superstition or perhaps a simple case of hysteria. But as more and more people began to witness the supernatural occurrences, the story spread, and it wasn't long before the Mackey household became a center of fascination and fear. What made this case particularly intriguing was the way it seemed to defy all traditional explanations of haunting. This wasn't a poltergeist simply moving objects. It was an active force, as if something or someone was trying to communicate or make its presence known. Curiously, Esther herself was often the subject of these events. At one point, she was allegedly struck by an invisible force, thrown to the ground, and forced into a trance-like state. During these moments, it was claimed that Esther would speak in a voice not her own, sometimes with a tone that was unfamiliar, even malevolent. Onlookers would report hearing strange guttural sounds coming from her, as if she were being controlled by some external force. She was even said to have levitated several feet off the ground during these episodes, her body moving in ways that seemed physically impossible. Many of the disturbances seemed to target Esther, but the supernatural occurrences also affected others. Local newspapers began to report the events, fueling widespread curiosity. Some even speculated that the disturbances might be the work of an evil spirit or demon, one that had somehow attached itself to Esther. Others wondered if this was an elaborate hoax designed to manipulate the public for personal gain. Though the testimony of so many witnesses made that theory seem less plausible, one of the most striking aspects of the Amherst mystery was the sheer variety of phenomena that were reported. There were accounts of strange writing appearing on walls, messages that seemed to be written by an invisible hand. Some reports described objects spontaneously combusting or flames shooting out from nowhere. At one point, it was even suggested that the entity responsible for the disturbances was capable of telepathic communication, as Esther allegedly spoke about events in the lives of others with no way of knowing them beforehand. The mystery seemed to be expanding beyond the boundaries of physical phenomena and delving into the realms of the unexplained. As the phenomena continued, the Mackey family sought the help of a local physician, Dr. Thomas H. Clark. Dr. Clark, too, became captivated by the strange occurrences. He reportedly witnessed Esther's levitation and even claimed to have seen her exhibit signs of supernatural strength, capable of moving heavy furniture with seemingly no effort. Despite his professional skepticism, the doctor's own testimony added a layer of credibility to the growing mystery. He even went so far as to contact several spiritualists who suggested that the disturbances could be the work of a restless spirit seeking attention. But just as the mystery grew, so too did the theories attempting to explain it. Some believed that the phenomenon was an example of what is known as poltergeist activity, a term used to describe unexplained events, often associated with emotional turmoil or repressed feelings. Could Esther's emotional state have triggered the events? Could the disturbances have been an unconscious projection of her inner turmoil, a manifestation of something hidden deep within her psyche? Others suggested that Esther herself was deliberately causing the disturbances, but this theory was quickly dismissed, especially as so many others were witness to the events. With no clear explanation forthcoming, the Great Amherst mystery began to fade from public view. Though it never completely disappeared from the annals of strange history, the mystery surrounding Esther Cox's haunting was never fully resolved. While some explanations were put forward, none seemed to provide the certainty that people craved. The haunting, which had spanned a period of months, ultimately stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Esther, after enduring the traumatic experiences, eventually left Amherst, and the disturbances ceased. What was the cause of the Great Amherst mystery? Was it a simple case of mass hysteria with the Mackey family's emotional distress fueling the eerie occurrences? Was it possible that Esther Cox was in some way responsible for what happened, whether consciously or unconsciously? Or was there something else at play, something beyond the realm of human understanding? Something that simply cannot be explained by the logic of science or reason. The events that transpired in Amherst remain one of the most enduring mysteries in the history of paranormal phenomena. The Great Amherst mystery leaves us with more questions than answers. How can a mystery of this magnitude, witnessed by so many and documented by the press, remain so elusive? Theories abound, but none provide a definitive explanation. And so, as we reflect on the eerie happenings in that small Nova Scotia town, we are left to wonder. Was it simply a case of human imagination gone wild? Or was something truly otherworldly responsible for the terror that gripped the Mackey family and their community? The truth remains buried in the fog of history, and it is a mystery that continues to haunt those who seek to understand it. At the turn of the 19th century, the world was rife with tales of uncharted territories, exotic lands, and the promise of new beginnings. Exploration was a fever that swept across Europe, driven by curiosity and ambition. It was an age when the maps of the world were still being filled in, where the allure of the unknown could capture the hearts of dreamers, adventurers, and even those desperate for a fresh start. One such tale would take a dark turn, unraveling the lives of hundreds of people who sought a new life in a place that for many existed only in the imagination. Poyais was advertised as a lush, prosperous, and utopian paradise. A land of fertile soil, abundant natural resources, and a welcoming government. This new country, supposedly nestled in the heart of Central America, was said to be rich in gold and the perfect place for settlers to build new lives free from the turmoil and poverty of Europe. The man who made these promises was a charismatic, ambitious, and self-proclaimed ruler by the name of Gregorio José de Rivas, who claimed to be the king of Poyais. The story begins in 1822 when Rivas, a former soldier from the region now known as Honduras, found himself in London attempting to convince investors, settlers, and even the British government that Poyais was the next great frontier. He used his connections and charm to spread the word. He published lavish pamphlets and even presented maps and descriptions of the new kingdom. The country, he claimed, was flourishing, with cities, roads, and infrastructure already in place, all waiting to be populated by eager Europeans. But there was one thing that Rivas left out of his extravagant tale. Poyais didn't exist. For reasons that remain unclear, Rivas's deception was remarkably effective. He convinced dozens of British investors as well as hundreds of poor men, women, and children seeking refuge from their troubled lives in Europe to board ships and sail across the Atlantic to this promised land. The settlers left with dreams of a better life, imagining a paradise where their hardships would finally end. In 1822, the first group of settlers sailed from England to Poyais. Upon arrival, they were met with shock. There was no bustling kingdom, no fertile land waiting for cultivation, and no resources to be found. Instead, they encountered a dense, uncharted jungle with no infrastructure, no help from locals, and no sign of a civilized society. With their hopes dashed, the settlers tried to survive in this harsh and unforgiving environment. Yet the situation quickly deteriorated. The group was without adequate provisions, and soon disease, hunger, and exposure began to take their toll. Some settlers tried to return to England, but their attempts were thwarted by the lack of ships. A few survivors even made it back to Europe, but their tales were dismissed as exaggerations or lies, despite the horrors they faced. It wasn't until 1823 that a second group of settlers left England to try their luck in Poyais. This time they were met by some of the surviving members of the first group, who had managed to find their way back. These survivors shared their grim experiences and their warnings reached London, but it was too late. The settlers, now determined to find the promised land, were undeterred. The tragedy, however, would continue. As more settlers arrived in the years that followed, they too found only death and despair in the jungle. It's estimated that around 1,500 people made the journey to Poyais, with nearly all of them meeting an untimely and tragic fate. The mystery of the Poyais settlers is as haunting as it is perplexing. How did Gregorio José de Rivas manage to deceive so many people? And why did he continue to perpetuate the illusion of Poyais long after its existence had been proven to be a fraud? What happened to those who perished in the jungles of Central America? And why were their deaths allowed to happen without a full investigation? Theories and speculations. The tragic fate of the Poyais settlers continues to provoke curiosity and debate among historians and mystery enthusiasts alike. While the facts of the case are clear, many people died and the land they sought never existed. The reasons behind Rivas's actions remain a subject of speculation. One possibility is that Rivas was a conman driven by the prospect of wealth and power. By fabricating an entire nation, he could have convinced people to invest in his grand dream of a new society, all the while taking their money and using it to fund his lavish lifestyle. Perhaps this ambition blinded him to the suffering of those he deceived, as he focused solely on building his own image as a ruler, no matter the cost. But if this was the case, why did he persist in the deception even after the first wave of settlers returned to England with their tragic tales? Could Rivas have believed in his own vision of peace? It's possible that he was so enamored with his creation, a country of wealth and prosperity, that he was able to convince himself and others of its existence, even in the face of mounting evidence to the contrary. In the 19th century, information was not as easily disseminated as it is today, and the lack of reliable communication made it easy for such grand schemes to thrive. Rivas may have convinced himself and his followers that they were simply in the midst of a temporary setback and that the land would soon reveal its true potential. Perhaps he believed that all he needed was more settlers, more investment, and more time. Another possibility is that the Poyais incident was not a deliberate act of fraud, but rather a tragic misunderstanding. Some have speculated that Rivas may have actually believed in the existence of Poyais, basing his descriptions on misleading reports, rumors, or misinterpreted accounts from indigenous people. Perhaps he convinced himself that he was truly offering a new land for settlement, only to discover too late that the world he had described was only in his mind. But despite the myriad theories and ideas that swirl around the case, the question remains: what happened to the settlers who never returned? The fact that no one truly knows the fate of all those who disappeared into the jungles of Central America adds an eerie layer to the mystery. Did the survivors of Poyais manage to return home? And if so, why were they never heard from again? Were their stories intentionally buried, silenced by forces who did not want the scandal to tarnish the image of the settlers' noble intentions? Or were there other, more sinister forces at play in the jungles of Poyais? Forces that would remain hidden from view. As time passed, the memory of Poyais slowly faded from public consciousness, but the tragedy remains one of the most haunting episodes in the history of colonial exploration. The settlers who were lost to the jungles of Central America remain a symbol of the perils of blind ambition, misplaced trust, and the human desire to escape the confines of one's reality. The truth about Poyais may never be fully understood. The maps may have been drawn, but the land was never found. The promises of a bright future were shattered, and the settlers who followed those promises into the unknown were lost. What remains is an eerie void in the historical record, one that continues to haunt those who seek to unravel its mystery. How many lives were lost, and why did the deception continue for so long? Could it have been avoided? Or was the dream of Poe an inevitability? A tragic tale written in the stars of history. The disappearance of the Poyais settlers will forever stand as a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying mysteries are not just the ones we can't solve, but the ones that leave us questioning what could have been. In the late 19th century, a strange phenomenon swept across the skies of America, one that would leave a lasting imprint on the collective imagination. It began in 1896, when reports of a mysterious airship began to emerge, stretching from the far west to the east. These sightings, marked by descriptions of flying machines unlike anything the world had ever seen, were soon to become a widespread enigma, sending ripples of intrigue and fear through the populace. The accounts of these sightings were often vivid and full of detail, yet curiously consistent in the broad strokes. Witnesses described large cigar-shaped objects with illuminated windows and sometimes propellers gliding silently or buzzing through the night skies. The airships were said to emit lights, often described as brilliant and strange, casting an eerie glow upon the landscape below. Those who saw them reported that the objects moved with impossible speed, sometimes hovering and at other times accelerating into the distance. Many observers spoke of hearing the noise of an engine or propellers, while others reported silence as if the crafts defied all laws of aviation known at the time. One of the first and most widely discussed sightings took place in Sacramento, California on November 17, 1896, when a man named William H.S. Mallister claimed to have seen a cigar-shaped object, which was brightly lit, hover over his farm for several minutes before disappearing. Soon after, similar reports began to pour in from all over the United States. From Nevada to Kansas, from the Midwest to the East Coast, the airship sightings grew in number and intrigue. The stories came from towns big and small, with witnesses ranging from farmers and laborers to prominent businessmen and officials. The media took notice, and newspapers across the country began to carry headlines such as "Mysterious airships reported flying over California," and "What is this strange object in the sky?" What was going on? Could it be that a new kind of aircraft had been developed in secret? If so, by whom and for what purpose? Was this the dawn of a new era of flight, or was it something else entirely? As more people came forward with their own accounts, the descriptions of the mysterious ships varied only slightly, reinforcing the idea that something truly unusual was occurring. Some witnesses reported seeing an airship piloted by human-like figures, while others described the machines as empty, as if operated by unknown forces. It's important to note that while the sightings were numerous, they were not universally accepted as truth. Many skeptics suggested that the reports were nothing more than hoaxes, hallucinations, or mass hysteria. The idea that such craft could exist in an era where human flight was still in its infancy seemed too far-fetched. Yet the stories continued, with more and more people coming forward convinced that they had seen something extraordinary. In November 1897, a particularly striking report from Aurora, Texas, caught the public's attention. According to the story, a flying machine described as a cigar-shaped craft had crashed on a local farm. The object was said to have exploded upon impact, scattering debris across the land. The most chilling part of the tale, however, was the alleged discovery of the remains of a strange creature at the crash site. Descriptions of this being varied, but it was often said to have a humanoid shape with features too alien to be easily understood. Some reports even suggested that the creature was a pilot who had perished in the crash. Despite this tantalizing account, there were those who were quick to question the veracity of the Aurora incident. No photographic evidence was ever produced, and the story was dismissed by many as a fabrication or an exaggeration. Yet, the legend persisted, and in the decades that followed, the Aurora crash became a cornerstone of UFO folklore, feeding into the idea that these airship sightings were not merely the result of human invention, but potentially something far more mysterious and inexplicable. So, what were these airships? Mainstream explanations focused on the idea that the sightings were the result of human-made aircraft, likely balloons or dirigibles that were being experimented with in secret. The Zeppelin, for example, had been in development in Europe since the late 1800s, and it's possible that early prototypes were tested in the United States. The mystery lights described by witnesses could have been the reflection of gas lights used for illumination on these airships. However, this theory does not fully explain the craft's incredible speeds and maneuverability, nor does it account for the odd behavior of some of the objects, such as the hovering and sudden acceleration described by witnesses. Could it be that these airships were prototypes for some form of advanced aircraft? Was there some kind of secret military technology at play? While there were no definitive explanations, the possibility of secret military or experimental aviation projects had its own set of implications. Were governments or private entities conducting tests in secret? aware that the technology of flight was evolving far more rapidly than the public realized. There are also those who suggest that these sightings could have been the result of psychological phenomena. The 1890s were a time of tremendous change and uncertainty, with rapid industrialization and the expansion of science and technology. Could the public, caught up in the excitement of the age, have projected their hopes and fears onto the night sky, creating an illusion of airships where none existed? Some have suggested that the widespread reports of airship sightings may have been a manifestation of collective anxiety and fascination with the unknown, but there is another possibility that some have speculated about for years, one that pushes the boundaries of conventional thought. Could the airship sightings have been a precursor to the modern era of UFO encounters? While the term UFO would not be coined until the mid-10th century, some enthusiasts point to the airship wave as one of the earliest indications that something unexplained had been occurring in the skies. The descriptions of strange flying objects and the mysterious lights that accompanied them bear remarkable similarities to reports of UFOs in the 20th and 21st centuries. Could the airship sightings of the 1890s have been a glimpse into a larger, more complex mystery that continues to unfold today? For those who believe in the extraterrestrial hypothesis, the coincidence of the sightings and the bizarre details surrounding the incidents, including the Aurora crash, serve as intriguing pieces of a puzzle. Could these strange objects have come from somewhere beyond our world, visiting Earth long before we began to explore the stars ourselves? The thought of alien visitors in the 19th century raises more questions than answers. If the airships were indeed extraterrestrial in origin, what was their purpose? Were they observing humanity in its early days of industrialization? Or was there something else at play? Ultimately, the airship sightings of 1896 to 1897 remain an unsolved mystery, one that has sparked endless debate and speculation for over a century. The lack of physical evidence, the conflicting reports, and the passage of time all contribute to the enduring uncertainty surrounding the events. Were these mysterious crafts the result of human ingenuity, or something far stranger? The truth may never fully emerge, but the question lingers. What might we have missed in those long-ago skies? Could the world have been on the brink of discovering something that even now we are not prepared to understand? The airships are gone, but the mystery of their existence persists, waiting to be unraveled. And as we look to the stars, we are left wondering, was the sky once and perhaps still full of secrets we are only just beginning to comprehend?